The crystal wine glasses clinked as Sophia Richardson raised a toast, her perfectly manicured hands steady despite the third glass of Bordeaux. To family success, she announced, her eyes fixing on me with barely concealed disdain. While the rest of the family celebrated their supposed success, I sat quietly at the massive dining table, watching my mother-in-law perform for her usual Sunday dinner audience. My husband Michael drifted uncomfortably beside me but remained silent. He never did have the courage to stand up to his mother. Such a shame about your little boutique, Sarah, Sophia continued, false sympathy dripping from every word. I warned Michael that retail was such a risky business. Not everyone is cut out for the corporate world. My name is Sarah Jeanne, and at 34, I was watching my mother-in-law celebrate what she thought was my financial ruin after 2 years of her careful sabotage. She believed she had finally succeeded in proving I wasn't worthy of her precious son or the Richardson family name. These things happen, I said mildly, taking a small sip of wine. Business is unpredictable. Sophia's smile widened. She loved it when I played the defeated daughter-in-law. Of course, dear. Not everyone can build something lasting like Richardson Beauty. 30 years of success doesn't come easily. I thought about the documents sitting in my home office, signed and ready for tomorrow morning's board meeting. Sophia had no idea that while she'd been busy destroying my small chain of boutiques, I'd been orchestrating the biggest business coup in her company's history. Mom, Michael attempted weakly, maybe we should talk about something else. Why? Sophia cut him off. We need to discuss your future, Michael. Now that Sarah's financial situation has changed, perhaps it's time to consider other options. I knew exactly what she meant by other options. Rebecca Holmes, the daughter of Sophia's best friend, had recently returned to town after her divorce. Sophia had been not so subtly pushing her toward Michael for months. My phone buzzed quietly. A message from Daniel, my lawyer. Everything's set for tomorrow. Board votes confirmed. She won't know what hit her. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment to compose myself. In the massive marble bathroom of the Richardson mansion, I stared at my reflection and thought about how it had all started 3 years ago. I'd been the rising star of the retail world. My boutique chain, Urban Chic, was expanding rapidly, featured in major fashion magazines, and attracting attention from luxury brands. Then I made what Sophia considered my fatal mistake. I married her son. Michael and I had met at a charity gala. He was sweet, kind, and completely dominated by his mother. But I loved him and foolishly thought love would be enough to overcome Sophia's disapproval of my new money status and Chinese-American background. The sabotage started small. Sophia would casually mention to her society friends that my boutiques were having quality issues. Key suppliers suddenly canceled contracts. Landlords unexpectedly raised rents or refused to renew leases. Each problem seemed random, but I knew better. What Sophia didn't know was that I'd been recording everything. Every casual phone call where she urged suppliers to drop me, every meeting where she pressured property owners, every subtle threat she made to anyone who did business with Urban Chic. But more importantly, she never bothered to look closely at the group of investment firms that had been quietly buying up shares of Richardson Beauty over the past year. Why would she? The companies all seemed independent, legitimate, with no connection to me. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. Final share count confirmed. You control 62% through the holding companies. Board meeting scheduled for 9:00 a.m. I returned to the dining room just as Sophia was starting another story about her business success. It's all about connections, really, she was saying. The right people, the right background. You understand, Sarah. Perfectly, I replied, thinking about the connections I'd made while building my case against her. The suppliers who'd provided documentation of her interference, the property owners who'd recorded her threats, the executives at her company who were tired of her outdated leadership and discriminatory practices. Michael touched my hand under the table, a small gesture of support he only dared when his mother wasn't looking. He had no idea what was coming either. I kept him in the dark to protect him and to ensure his reactions tomorrow would be genuine. More wine, Sarah? Sophia offered, her smile sharp. Drown your sorrows? No, thank you, I said. I have an early meeting tomorrow. She couldn't resist the opening. Oh, still trying to save your little shops. Sometimes it's better to just admit defeat gracefully. I thought about the times I cried in private over her sabotage, the nights spent rebuilding after each attack, the careful planning and patience it had taken to turn her own tactics against her. Actually, I said, it's a corporate consulting meeting. I've been exploring new opportunities. Sophia's smile turned condescending. How nice. Perhaps something more appropriate to your skills. Retail sales, perhaps. Michael started to object, but I squeezed his hand, stopping him. Let her have this moment. Let her think she'd won. Tomorrow would be soon enough for truth. As dinner wound down, Sophia pulled Michael aside for a private word, one she ensured was just loud enough for me to hear. Rebecca is looking lovely since her return, she said. You remember how close you two were in college. Sometimes first choices aren't the best choices, darling. I gathered my things, pretending not to hear. Sophia Richardson had spent 3 years trying to drive me out of her family and destroy my business. She thought she'd succeeded. In less than 12 hours, she would learn how wrong she was. Sarah, she called as we were leaving. Don't be a stranger just because things didn't work out with your business. Doesn't mean you're not still family, in a way. I turned back, unable to resist one small hint. Thank you, Sophia. You've taught me so much about business, about how to acquire things people don't want to let go of, about patience. Tomorrow should be interesting. She frowned slightly, but I was already walking out, Michael following behind me. In the car, he'd apologized again for his mother's behavior. I don't know why she's like this. I should have said something. It's fine, I assured him. Everything's going to change very soon. What do you mean? I patted his hand. Just be ready for tomorrow's news, and remember that I love you. That night, I reviewed everything one final time. The evidence of Sophia's sabotage carefully compiled and ready to be released if needed. The shareholding documents showing my controlling interest in Richardson Beauty. The board votes already secured. My phone lit up with a final message from Daniel. All systems go for tomorrow. Sophia won't know what hit her. I smiled, thinking of Sophia's smug toast to family success. Tomorrow would redefine exactly what that meant. The Richardson Beauty boardroom felt different at 8:45 a.m. as I took my seat at the head of the table, Sophia's usual chair, but she didn't know that yet. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see her arriving in the parking lot, striding toward the building with her usual air of entitlement. Are you sure about this? Daniel asked quietly, arranging the documents we need. Once we start, there's no going back. I nodded, thinking of all the nights I'd spent building up to this moment. She chose this path, Daniel. She just didn't expect anyone to fight back. Sophia swept into the room at exactly 9:00 a.m., faltering slightly when she saw me. Sarah, what are you doing here? Her eyes narrowed as she noticed me in her seat. That's my place. Not anymore, I said calmly as the other board members filed in. Please take any other seat. We have a lot to discuss. This is ridiculous, she snapped, remaining standing. I'm the CEO of this company. I don't know what game you're playing. Actually, Daniel interrupted smoothly, as of this morning, Ms. Zhang is the majority shareholder of Richardson Beauty, controlling 62% of voting shares through various investment vehicles. This emergency board meeting has been called to address the leadership transition. The color drained from Sophia's face. That's impossible. I would know if someone was buying up shares. Would you? I asked, opening the folder in front of me. Like you knew who was really behind the Pacific Ridge Investment Group or Summit Valley Holdings? You've been so busy trying to destroy my business that you never noticed who was buying into yours. The other board members were watching with barely concealed interest. Many of them had their own stories of Sophia's tyrannical leadership and discriminatory practices. This is absurd, Sophia sputtered. Michael will never allow. The boardroom door opened and Michael walked in. I called him early this morning, finally explaining everything. He looked pale but determined. Hello, Mother, he said quietly, taking a seat beside me. Sophia's face twisted with rage and betrayal. You knew about this? I just found out, Michael replied. And after hearing everything, all the ways you tried to destroy Sarah's business, all the manipulation, I fully support her taking control. The votes are already secured, Daniel added, distributing documents to everyone. The board has agreed that a change in leadership is necessary for the company's continued growth and ethical operation. I watched Sophia's carefully maintained facade crack as she realized the depth of what was happening. You can't do this to me, she whispered. This company is my life. Like my business was mine? I asked quietly. before you systematically destroyed it? I have evidence of everything, Sophia. Every threat, every manipulated contract, every sabotaged deal. I projected the evidence onto the boardroom screen, emails, recorded conversations, sworn statements from suppliers and property owners. 3 years of careful documentation of her campaign against me. You could have just accepted me, I said as she sank into a chair, watching her carefully constructed world crumble. Could have given me a chance to prove myself. Instead, you decided I wasn't good enough for your son or your social circle, so you tried to break me. The board members were reviewing the evidence with growing concern. Sophia's actions hadn't just been personal, they'd been unethical and potentially illegal. What do you want? Sophia finally asked, her voice hollow. I want what I've earned, I replied. Control of this company, a chance to modernize it, expand it, make it better than it ever was under your leadership. And I want you to understand exactly how it feels to have everything taken away by someone you underestimated. Daniel began distributing the severance agreements we prepared. You can exit gracefully, I told Sophia. Keep your social standing, your country club memberships, your place in society. Or you can fight, and I'll release everything I have to the press. Your choice. Her hands shook as she read the documents. You thought of everything, haven't you? I learned from the best, I said. You taught me that patience and careful planning are everything in business, and sometimes you have to let your opponent think they're winning before you make your final move. The next hour was a blur of signatures and legal terminology. Sophia signed everything put in front of her, her perfect makeup failing to hide her devastation. By 10:30, she was no longer CEO of Richardson Beauty. As she stood to leave, she turned to Michael one last time. She planned this all along, she said bitterly. She married you to get to me. Michael shook his head. No, Mother. I married her because I loved her. You're the one who turned it into a war. And you lost. After Sophia left, the board quickly approved the transition plan we developed. By noon, I was officially CEO of Richardson Beauty, with a mandate to modernize and expand the company. That evening, Michael and I sat in our home office, processing everything that had happened. I wish you'd told me sooner, he said quietly. I needed to protect you, I explained, and I needed your reactions to be genuine. Your mother had to believe you knew nothing. He nodded slowly. What happens now? Now we rebuild, both the company and our family, but on different terms. Over the next few months, Richardson Beauty underwent a transformation. We launched new product lines, modernized our marketing, and expanded into international markets. The stock price soared. Sophia retreated to her country house, emerging only occasionally for carefully selected social events. The whispers followed her, about how her Chinese-American daughter-in-law had outmaneuvered her, taken her company, proven herself more than worthy of the Richardson name. A year later, I sat in what had been Sophia's office, reviewing quarterly reports. The company was thriving, our market share growing. The phone rang, Sophia's number. I understand now, she said without preamble. What I did to you, what it feels like. That was the point, I replied. The company, it's doing better than ever. Yes. A long pause. Perhaps I was wrong about you. About everything. I thought about the years of pain she caused, the nights I had spent crying over her sabotage, the careful planning it had taken to turn it all around. Yes, I said simply. Another pause. Michael mentioned you're expecting a girl. Due in March. I'd like to be part of her life, if you'll allow it. I looked at the family photo on my desk. Michael and me at last year's company gala, both smiling genuinely for the first time in years. We can try, I said carefully, but things will be different. No manipulation, no games, no trying to control everything. I understand, she said quietly. You've certainly proved you're stronger than I thought. After we hung up, I walked to the window, looking out over the city. Sophia had spent years trying to prove I wasn't good enough for her family or her company. In defeating her, I proved her right. I wasn't just good enough, I was better. The company flourished under my leadership, expanding into new markets and product lines. Michael found his own strength, starting a charitable foundation that worked to support small businesses affected by corporate bullying. And Sophia, she learned what it meant to be on the other side of power, to have to ask instead of demand, to accept instead of control. Sometimes at family gatherings, I catch her watching me, not with the old contempt, but with something like respect. She's learned that true power isn't about destroying others to maintain control. It's about building something stronger from the ashes of what others tried to destroy.
Just because we're family doesn't mean I'll let you ruin us, I whispered defeatedly into the dark as I recounted the money in my drawer. The dim glow of the bedside lamp cast eerie shadows across the room, but it was enough light to confirm my fears. There was a significant sum missing from my personal savings. My hands trembled as I sorted through the bills, the stark realization sinking in that this wasn't the first time. Over the past few months, I had noticed a gradual depletion, but I had brushed it off, convincing myself I must have miscounted or spent more than I thought. Now the evidence was undeniable. A creak in the hallway made me jump, and I hastily stuffed the money back into the drawer, my heart pounding in my ears. Evan shuffled into the room, his eyes heavy with fatigue and worry etched deep into the lines of his face. "You're still up?" he mumbled, sinking onto the edge of the bed. I swallowed hard, forcing a tight smile. Just couldn't sleep. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I couldn't bring myself to confront him. Not yet. Evan nodded absently, his mind clearly elsewhere. This was becoming increasingly common. The distant gaze, the preoccupied demeanor, the late nights out with flimsy excuses. Something was deeply wrong, and the missing money only added to my growing sense of dread. As he drifted off to sleep beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing with questions and doubts. Was Evan the one taking my money? If so, why? And how could I protect our family from whatever troubles he might be facing? The weight of the secrets hanging between us felt suffocating, and I knew I couldn't let this fester any longer. Tomorrow I decided I would find a way to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Just because we're family doesn't mean I'll let him ruin us. The next morning, my hands shook as I placed the hidden camera in the living room, angling it discreetly towards the hallway leading to our bedroom. A pit of dread formed in my stomach, but I knew I had to catch Evan in the act. I couldn't let this torment of uncertainty continue. Later that day, as Evan left for his meeting, I hurried to check the footage. My heart sank as I watched him sneak into our bedroom and rummage through my drawer, stuffing handfuls of cash into his pockets. The betrayal felt like a physical blow, and I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. When Evan returned a few hours later, I was waiting for him in the living room, the damning video queued up on the laptop. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained emotion. Evan paled as he took in the scene before him, his eyes darting between me and the computer screen. "Mara, I can explain." "Save it," I snapped, hitting play on the video. We watched in silence as the footage played out, the sickening reality of his theft unfolding before our eyes. When it ended, Evan slumped into the armchair, burying his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry," he mumbled, his words muffled by his palms. "I have a gambling problem. I owe people money, a lot of money." The confession hung heavy in the air, and a wave of nausea washed over me. All this time, while I had been working tirelessly to support our family, he had been squandering our hard-earned savings on his addiction. "How could you do this to us?" I demanded, my voice rising with each word. "To Lila? To your own mother?" Evan flinched at the mention of our daughter and his mother, who lived with us. "I never meant for it to go this far," he pleaded. "I thought I could win it back, pay off my debts." "You lied to me," I spat, disgust curling in my gut. "You looked me in the eye and lied, day after day." Evan nodded miserably, unable to meet my gaze. In that moment I saw him for what he truly was, a man consumed by his vices, willing to sacrifice everything for the thrill of the gamble. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I had to do next. "You need help, professional help," I stated firmly, "and until you get it, you're not going anywhere near our finances again." Evan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. "But Mara, please, I'll get it under control, I swear." I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. "I can't trust you anymore, Evan. Not after this." I gestured to the laptop, the evidence of his deception laid bare. As I watched him crumble before me, a part of me ached for the man I had once loved. But the greater part, the part that longed to protect our family, our future, hardened with determination. I would do whatever it took to shield us from the wreckage of his addiction, even if it meant tearing our lives apart to rebuild them anew. In the days that followed, Evan seemed to be making an effort. He started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings and agreed to hand over control of our finances to me. I kept a close eye on our bank statements, desperate to believe that he was finally on the path to recovery. But deep down, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was still off. Little things kept catching my eye. The way Evan would tense up whenever I mentioned money, the furtive glances he would cast around the room as if afraid someone was watching. One evening, as I was going through our mail, a letter from the bank caught my attention. It was a statement for a credit card account I didn't recognize. Frowning, I tore it open, my heart sinking as I scanned the charges, thousands of dollars in cash advances and gambling-related expenses. I confronted Evan as soon as he walked through the door, thrusting the statement in his face. "Care to explain this?" He blanched, stumbling back a step. "Mara, I can explain." "Save it," I spat, fury bubbling up inside me. "You promised you were getting help. You said you were done with this addiction." Evan ran a shaky hand through his hair, his eyes darting around the room. "I am getting help, I swear. It's just harder than I thought." "Harder?" I echoed incredulously. "You've been lying to me this whole time, stealing from us again." Evan opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off, too angry to listen to his excuses. "How can I ever trust you again? You've betrayed us, betrayed our family." As the words left my lips, I saw Eleanor hovering in the doorway, her face etched with concern. "What's going on?" she asked cautiously. I turned to her, the statement crumpled in my fist. "Your son has been gambling again, racking up debt behind our backs." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Evan, a flicker of something like recognition passing over her features. "I knew it," she murmured, shaking her head sadly. "I saw the signs back when he was a kid, the lies, the sneaking around. It all makes sense now." Evan flinched as if she had struck him, his face flushing with shame. "You mean you suspected something like this before?" I demanded, whirling back to face Eleanor. She nodded solemnly. "I caught him stealing from me a few times when he was a teenager. Small amounts, but it set off alarm bells. I tried to confront him about it, but he always denied everything." Evan dropped his gaze to the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. As the weight of Eleanor's revelation settled over us, I felt a surge of determination rise within me. If this was a pattern, a cycle that had been going on for years, then I knew what I had to do. "Enough is enough," I declared, my voice steely with resolve. "We're not going to enable this anymore, Evan. You need to get serious help, or—" I trailed off, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air. Evan lifted his head, his eyes haunted with the realization that this time there might be consequences he couldn't gamble his way out of. After the confrontation with Evan and the revelations from Eleanor, I felt like I was living in a waking nightmare. The man I had vowed to love and cherish had been lying to me, stealing from our family to feed his insatiable addiction. In the days that followed, I kept a close eye on our finances, determined to uncover the full extent of Evan's deception. As I pored over bank statements and credit card bills, a sickening pattern began to emerge. Cash advances, wire transfers, even loans taken out against our home without my knowledge. My hands trembled as I printed out the damning evidence, the numbers swimming before my eyes. How could he have done this to us? How could he have risked everything we had worked so hard for? When Evan returned home that evening, I was waiting for him in the living room, the stack of papers laid out on the coffee table, like a twisted monument to his betrayal. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice deathly calm. Evan froze in the doorway, his eyes widening as he took in the scene before him. "Mara, He trailed off, his gaze dropping to the floor. "You what, Evan?" I prodded, anger simmering beneath the surface. "You thought you could keep lying to me? Keep stealing from our family?" He flinched but remained silent, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I demanded, gesturing to the documents. "You've taken out loans against our home, put us in debt up to our eyeballs. All for what? Another roll of the dice." Evan lifted his head, his eyes pleading. "I wanted to protect us from bankruptcy," he mumbled, his words ringing hollow. I let out a mirthless laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. "Protect us? By gambling away our future, our security? How can you possibly justify this?" Evan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He knew there was no justification, no excuse that could undo the damage he had caused. "You've betrayed us, Evan," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've betrayed our family, our trust. How can I ever believe a word you say again?" He hung his head, shame etched into every line of his face. In that moment, I saw him for what he truly was. A man consumed by his vices, willing to sacrifice everything for the thrill of the gamble. As I stared at the crumpled figure before me, I knew that things could never be the same between us. The man I had loved was lost, perhaps forever, to the grip of his addiction. But even as my heart shattered, a steely resolve took root within me. I would not let his selfish actions destroy our family. I would fight with every fiber of my being to protect what was left, our daughter, our home, our future. And if Evan couldn't find the strength to conquer his demons, then I would have no choice but to cut him loose, once and for all. In the weeks that followed my discovery of Evan's deception, a palpable tension settled over our household. Evan had promised to seek professional help and attend regular Gamblers Anonymous meetings, but I found it increasingly difficult to trust his words. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Eleanor approached me in the kitchen, her expression grave. "Mara, we need to talk," she said, her voice low. A knot of dread formed in the pit of my stomach as I set down the knife I had been using to chop vegetables. "What is it?" Eleanor glanced over her shoulder, as if afraid of being overheard. "It's about Evan," she continued. "I saw him yesterday at the casino downtown." The air seemed to leave my lungs in a rush, and I gripped the edge of the counter for support. "You're sure?" I managed to choke out. Eleanor nodded solemnly. "I was running errands in that area and spotted him through the window. He was sitting at a poker table, playing like he didn't have a care in the world." White-hot fury surged through me, mingling with a sickening sense of betrayal. After everything he had put us through, after all his promises to get help, he was still gambling, still lying to our faces. "That lying son of a—" I began, but Eleanor held up a hand, cutting me off. "I know, believe me, I know," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "But we can't let him continue down this path. Not anymore." I took a deep, shuddering breath, willing myself to remain calm. "What do you suggest?" Eleanor's expression hardened, a steely determination settling over her features. "We need to take action," she stated, "for Lila's sake, if nothing else." My heart clenched at the mention of our daughter, who remained blissfully unaware of the turmoil her father's addiction had caused. I couldn't bear the thought of her finding out the truth, of her world being shattered by Evan's selfish choices. "You're right," I agreed, my voice steady despite the maelstrom of emotions raging within me. "We can't let him drag us down any further." Together, Eleanor and I began to formulate a plan, a way to confront Evan with the evidence of his deceit and force him to face the consequences of his actions. As we discussed our options, a sense of grim resolve settled over me. Evan had made his choices, time and time again, choosing his addiction over his family. Now, it was our turn to choose, to fight for our future, even if it meant cutting him loose once and for all. As I looked at Eleanor, her eyes burning with a protective fierceness, I knew we were united in our determination. We would do whatever it took to protect our family, to secure our financial stability, and to ensure that Lila's future wasn't gambled away by her father's vices. Evan had betrayed us for the last time. Now he would face the consequences of his actions, no matter how painful they might be. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than I had anticipated. Eleanor and I had gathered irrefutable evidence of Evan's continued gambling, photographs of him at the casino, bank statements showing unexplained cash withdrawals, even receipts from seedy establishments known for hosting underground poker games. As Evan strode through the front door that evening, whistling a cheerful tune, I felt a surge of white-hot anger coursing through my veins. How dare he act so carefree, so oblivious to the turmoil he had inflicted upon our family? "Evan, we need to talk," I stated, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. He froze, his brow furrowing as he registered the steely expressions on Eleanor's and my faces. "What's going on?" he asked, a note of trepidation creeping into his tone. Without a word, I strode over to the coffee table and snatched up the stack of evidence, thrusting it towards him. "Care to explain this?" Evan's eyes widened as he took in the damning photographs and documents, his face draining of color. "Mara, I can explain." He stammered, but the words rang hollow, even to my own ears. Save it, I spat, my patience utterly depleted. We know you've been lying to us, Evan. We know you've been gambling again, squandering our hard-earned money on your addiction. Evan flinched as if I had struck him, his gaze darting between Eleanor and me, panic etched into every line of his face. How could you do this to us? I demanded, tears of rage and betrayal stinging my eyes. To Lila? After everything we've been through, after all your promises to get help? Evan opened his mouth, but no words came out. For once it seemed his silver tongue had failed him. You've put us in debt, Evan, Eleanor chimed in, her voice laced with disappointment. You've risked our home, our financial security, all for the thrill of the gamble. Evan shook his head vehemently, his eyes pleading. No, you don't understand. I had it under control. I was going to win it all back. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, disbelief mingling with disgust. Win it back? Evan, wake up! You've been spiraling deeper and deeper into this addiction, lying to us every step of the way. He flinched again, his shoulders slumping in defeat. How could you gamble with our daughter's future like this? I pressed on, my voice thick with emotion. How could you put your own selfish desires above the well-being of our family? Tears spilled down Evan's cheeks, but I felt no pity, only a bone-deep weariness. I was tired of the lies, the excuses, the broken promises. We've given you chance after chance, Evan, Eleanor said, her tone gentler than mine but no less resolute. But you've squandered every opportunity, every second chance we've offered. Evan shook his head weakly, but we both knew the truth. He had dug himself into a hole so deep, there was no easy way out. As I stared at the crumpled, broken figure before me, I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me. This was the moment, the pivotal point, where everything had to change. It's time to face the consequences of your actions, Evan, I stated, my voice steadier than I had expected. No more lies, no more excuses. This ends now. He lifted his head, his eyes swimming with desperation, but I had already made my decision. I would no longer enable his self-destructive behavior, no matter how much it hurt. This was the only way to save our family, and if Evan couldn't see that, then he would have to learn the hard way. The weight of our confrontation hung heavy in the air, the silence thick and suffocating. Evan stood before us, shoulders slumped, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. Please, he croaked, his voice cracking with emotion. Give me one more chance. I swear, I'll get help. I'll turn things around. I felt a flicker of pity stir within me, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of his lies, his betrayal. How many times had we heard those same empty promises before? Your chances ran out a long time ago, Evan, I stated, my voice hard and unyielding. We've given you more opportunities than you deserved, and you squandered every single one. Evan flinched as if I had struck him, his gaze dropping to the floor in shame. This has to stop, son, Eleanor chimed in, her tone tinged with sadness. We can't keep enabling your addiction, not when it's destroying our family. But I need help, Evan pleaded, desperation lacing his words. I can't do this alone. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. You should have thought of that before you gambled away our savings, our trust, our future. Evan opened his mouth, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. Enough, I said firmly. We're done with the lies, the excuses. It's time to face the consequences of your actions. Fear flickered in Evan's eyes, and he took a step back as if recoiling from a physical blow. What are you saying? He asked, his voice little more than a whisper. I steeled myself, drawing in a deep breath. You have two choices, Evan. Either you get professional help, real help, and relinquish all control over our finances, or... I let the unspoken threat hang in the air, letting the weight of it sink in. Evan's eyes widened, darting between Eleanor and me. Or what? Or we expose you, Eleanor stated bluntly. We take everything we know, the evidence, the documents, the pictures, and we make sure everyone knows the truth about your addiction. A strangled sound escaped Evan's throat, a mixture of fear and disbelief. Your job, your reputation, your relationships, they'll all be at risk, I continued, my voice unwavering, not to mention the legal consequences of the loans and debts you've racked up. Evan shook his head vehemently, his face pale. You can't. You wouldn't. Try us, I challenged, my gaze steely. We're done watching you gamble away our future, Evan. It's time to take back control. A heavy silence fell over the room, the weight of my ultimatum pressing down on us all. Evan's eyes darted between Eleanor and me, searching for a glimmer of mercy, a flicker of hesitation. But there was none to be found. We had both reached our breaking point, our love and loyalty stretched to the limit by his selfish actions. "This is your last chance, Evan," I said, my voice softer but no less resolute. "Choose wisely." Evan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. For a long, agonizing moment, he remained silent, the gravity of his decision hanging in the balance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he gave a slow, defeated nod. "Okay," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'll do it. I'll get help." As the words left his lips, I felt a surge of relief mixed with trepidation. This was the first step, the first glimmer of hope that we might be able to salvage what was left of our family. But deep down, I knew the road ahead would be long and treacherous, paved with temptation and the ever-present threat of relapse. Evan's addiction had taken root deep within him, and it would take every ounce of strength and determination we possessed to uproot it. Yet as I looked at Eleanor, her eyes shining with a mixture of sadness and resolve, I knew we were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together as a family, no matter the cost. In the weeks that followed Evan's agreement to seek help, a fragile sense of hope began to take root within me. He enrolled in an intensive outpatient program and attended regular Gamblers Anonymous meetings, his demeanor subdued and contrite. Yet, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the lingering doubts that gnawed at the back of my mind. Evan's addiction had taken such a firm hold, consuming him so completely. Could he truly break free from its clutches? My suspicions were confirmed one fateful evening when I received a call from an unknown number. Frowning, I answered, only to be met with the gruff voice of a man I didn't recognize. "Is this Mara Lewis?" he asked, his tone laced with barely concealed hostility. "Yes, who is this?" I replied, my heart rate quickening with a sense of foreboding. "This is Tony Russo," the man stated, his words clipped and accusatory. "I own the poker room down on Maple Street." My blood ran cold as realization dawned. This was one of the seedy establishments where Evan had been known to frequent, feeding his addiction with high-stakes games. "I don't know what kind of game your husband is playing," Tony continued, his voice lowering to a threatening growl, "but he better pay up and fast." A wave of nausea washed over me as the implications of his words sank in. Evan had been gambling again, racking up debts with dangerous individuals. "How much does he owe you?" I managed to choke out, my throat constricting with a potent mixture of fear and anger. Tony rattled off a staggering figure, one that made my head spin with its sheer enormity. "Look, lady," he snarled, "I don't care how you get the money, just make sure your husband settles his tab. Otherwise, there might be consequences neither of you want to face." The line went dead, leaving me trembling in the suffocating silence of our living room. Betrayal and disappointment surged through me, bitter and all-consuming. How could Evan have done this after everything we had been through? After all his promises, his vows to change? As the minutes ticked by, the anger within me solidified into a steely resolve. I could no longer stand idly by, enabling Evan's self-destructive behavior. It was time to take drastic action, no matter how painful it might be. When Evan finally stumbled through the door hours later, his eyes bloodshot and his clothes disheveled, I was waiting for him, the damning evidence in hand. "Care to explain this?" I demanded, thrusting Tony's number and the record of his debts into Evan's trembling hands. His face drained of color, and he opened his mouth, but I cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Save it," I spat, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "I'm done with your lies, your excuses. You've betrayed us for the last time, Evan." Evan shook his head vehemently, his eyes pleading. "Mara, please, I can fix this. Just give me another chance." But his words fell on deaf ears. I had heard that same refrain too many times before, each promise hollower than the last. "You had your chance," I stated, my voice steely and unwavering, "and you blew it just like you've blown every other opportunity we've given you." Evan crumpled before me, his shoulders shaking with sobs, but I felt no pity, only a bone-deep wariness and a grim determination to protect what was left of our family. "Pack your things," I ordered, my heart hardening against his pleas. "You're leaving tonight." As the weight of my words settled over him, Evan lifted his head, his eyes shining with unshed tears and a dawning realization. This time there would be no second chances, no mercy. He had gambled away his last shot at redemption, and now he would have to face the consequences of his actions. Alone. The vibrant chime of my phone echoed through the bedroom, jarring me from a restless slumber. I glanced at the clock, 3:14 a.m. An uneasy feeling settled in my gut as I reached for the device. Work emergencies at this hour were rare, but not unheard of in my line of business. My fingers froze as I caught a glimpse of the screen. It wasn't a work notification, it was a message from an unknown number. Curiosity piqued, I swiped to unlock the phone, and my world shattered. "Can't wait to see you again, babe. That quickie in the supply closet was insane." The message was undoubtedly not meant for me, but the sender's identity was all too clear. Marissa, my cousin and supposed confidant, who had been staying with Derek and me to help during his recovery. Bile rose in my throat as I scrolled through the thread, each message more explicit than the last. The betrayal cut deeper with every lewd word, every suggestive emoji. Derek's affair with Marissa was laid bare before my eyes, the evidence irrefutable. I turned to face Derek's sleeping form, my vision blurred by unshed tears. How could he? How could they? Marissa was family, someone I had trusted implicitly. Yet there they were, carrying on a sordid affair right under my nose. Anger and hurt swirled within me, a tempestuous storm of emotions threatening to break loose. I longed to scream, to hurl accusations and demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. Instead, I slipped out of bed, my movements robotic, and made my way to the living room. I collapsed onto the couch, clutching Derek's phone like a lifeline, its damning contents a stark reminder of the life I thought I knew crumbling around me. Hours ticked by, the first rays of dawn peeking through the curtains. I heard footsteps behind me, the telltale creak of the floorboards announcing Derek's presence. "Elena, what are you doing up so early?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. I pivoted to face him, my jaw clenched, and held up the phone, the incriminating messages splayed across the screen. "Care to explain this?" Derek's expression morphed from confusion to panic in an instant. I can explain," he stammered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Explain what exactly?" I snapped, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "How you've been sleeping with my cousin right under my nose, how you've been betraying me with someone I trusted." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off, unwilling to hear his excuses. "Save it, Derek. I don't want to hear your lies anymore." Anger and anguish welled up within me, threatening to spill over. I fought to maintain my composure, to cling to the last shreds of dignity I had left. Derek's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes hardening. "If you hadn't been so wrapped up in your work all the time, maybe this wouldn't have happened." His words sliced through me like a knife, twisting the blade of betrayal deeper into my heart. In that moment, I knew our marriage was well and truly over. I rose from the couch, squaring my shoulders and meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. "Get out." Derek opened his mouth to protest, but I silenced him with a shake of my head. "Just go, Derek. We're done." As he stormed out of the apartment, the weight of his betrayal finally hit me, and I sank to the floor, sobs racking my body. But amidst the pain and heartbreak, a newfound determination took root within me. They would pay for this. Both of them. In the days following Derek's explosive revelation, a fog of grief and disbelief enveloped me. I alternated between fits of rage and deep sorrow, grappling with the harsh reality of his betrayal. But as the initial shock subsided, a steely resolve took root. I would not be a victim, not anymore. I confided in Alex, my closest friend and a brilliant lawyer. His jaw tightened as I recounted the sordid details, his normally jovial demeanor replaced by a cold fury. "That lying, deceitful bastard," he seethed, slamming his fist on the table. "We're going to bury him, Elena. I promise you that." With Alex's guidance, I began meticulously gathering evidence of Derek's misdeeds, leaving no stone unturned. Late nights were spent combing through financial records, unearthing a trail of embezzlement and fraud that seemed to stretch back years. Derek had the audacity to confront me one evening as I pored over the damning documents. "What are you up to, Elena?" he demanded, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. I met his gaze head-on, refusing to flinch. "Funny, I was about to ask you the same thing, though I think I already know the answer." He scoffed, his lips curling into a contemptuous sneer. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Newsflash, sweetheart, you're just a pretty face. Without me, your precious company would be nothing. White-hot rage coursed through my veins, but I reined it in, forcing a tight smile. We'll see about that, won't we? As the weeks passed, the web of deceit surrounding Derek and Marissa grew increasingly tangled. Marissa had not only been complicit in the affair, but had actively aided Derek in siphoning funds from my company. I summoned her to my office, the weight of the evidence heavy in my hands. She sauntered in, her expression a sickening mix of arrogance and feigned innocence. "Elena, darling, what's this all about?" she simpered, batting her eyelashes. I slapped the stack of papers onto the desk, my teeth clenched. "Cut the act, Marissa. I know everything. The affair, the embezzlement. You two make me sick." Her facade crumbled, replaced by a sneer that twisted her once familiar features into an ugly mask. "Oh, please, like you're some paragon of virtue. You were never around, always too busy with your precious company to pay attention to Derek. He needed someone who could actually satisfy him in more ways than one." The venom in her words stung, but I refused to let her see me flinch. "You're both going to pay for what you've done," I vowed, my voice low and dangerous. Marissa threw back her head and laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "And how exactly do you plan to do that? Face it, Elena, you're powerless. Derek and I hold all the cards." I leaned forward, my gaze boring into hers with icy determination. "We'll see about that." As she swept out of the office, I allowed myself a grim smile. They thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming. With Alex's help, I would dismantle their lives piece by piece, until they had nothing left but the consequences of their actions. The war had only just begun. In the wake of Marissa's taunting diatribe, a cold clarity washed over me. If I wanted to emerge victorious from this battle, I needed to arm myself to the teeth. Blind rage and impulsive actions would only play into Derek and Marissa's hands. No, I needed to be strategic, calculating, to fight fire with an inferno of my own making. I summoned Alex to my office, my expression grim. "It's time we took the gloves off," I stated, sliding the damning evidence across the desk towards him. His brow furrowed as he skimmed the documents, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Son of a bitch has been bleeding your company dry for years," he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "Exactly, which is why we need to hit him where it hurts. His bank account." I leaned forward, my gaze steely. "I want you to freeze every asset, revoke all access to funds, the whole 9 yards. Derek thinks money is power? Let's see how powerful he feels when he's broke and exposed as the fraud he is." A feral grin spread across Alex's face. "Consider it done. I'll have the paperwork filed first thing tomorrow morning." As Alex left to set the wheels in motion, I turned my attention to another crucial front, protecting my own assets. Derek and Marissa may have thought they held all the cards, but I wasn't about to make it easy for them. I summoned my finance team, my expression grave. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid we have a situation on our hands." Over the next few hours, I worked tirelessly to transfer funds, liquidate investments, and batten down every financial hatch. By the time the sun rose the next morning, my assets were secured, safely out of Derek and Marissa's grubby paws. The first salvo had been fired. A few days later, Alex strode into my office, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "It's done. Derek's assets have been frozen, and the authorities are investigating his financial dealings." Relief washed over me, but I knew this was just the beginning. Derek would undoubtedly retaliate, and I had to be prepared. Sure enough, my phone rang later that evening, Derek's name flashing across the screen. I answered with a smirk. "Hello, dear husband." His voice was a low snarl, barely contained fury simmering beneath the surface. "What the hell did you do, Elena? My accounts are locked, my cards declined, everything's frozen." "Oh, I'm sorry, did I fail to mention?" I feigned innocence, unable to resist twisting the knife. "I'm taking what's mine, Derek. Every last penny you stole from me, from my company, you and your little mistress are going to pay for what you've done." There was a beat of silence, and then he erupted, a torrent of vile profanities spewing forth. "You conniving bitch! You think you've won, but you're dead wrong. This isn't over, not by a long shot." The line went dead, but his words only fueled my resolve. Let him rant and rave. I was holding all the cards now. With my assets secure and the law on my side, Derek and Marissa were nothing more than trapped rats, their world crumbling around them. I poured myself a glass of wine, allowing a self-satisfied smile to tug at my lips. The battle was far from over, but the tides had well and truly turned in my favor. They had started this war, but I was going to finish it, and emerge victorious, no matter what it took. With Derek's assets frozen and the authorities sniffing around his financial dealings, it was time to unleash the next phase of my counterattack. I knew Derek wouldn't go down without a fight, but I was prepared for all-out war. I strode into Alex's office, my jaw set with grim determination. It's time we brought out the big guns. Alex looked up from his desk, eyebrows raised. You know I live for dramatic flair, but I'm going to need a bit more context here. I want to file for divorce and hit Derek with every legal claim in the book. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, the whole 9 yards. My voice was steely, brooking no argument. A feral grin spread across Alex's face. Now you're speaking my language. I'll have the paperwork drawn up immediately. True to his word, Alex had the divorce papers ready within days, complete with a laundry list of charges that would make any self-respecting criminal's head spin. I signed them with a flourish, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me. Derek's going to fight this tooth and nail, you know that, right? Alex cautioned, his expression serious. I met his gaze levelly. I'm counting on it. The moment the papers were filed, all hell broke loose. Derek's lawyer, a smarmy little weasel of a man, descended upon me like a rabid dog, hurling threats and accusations. This is a gross overreaction, Mrs. Davis, he sneered, his beady eyes narrowed with disdain. My client may have made some indiscretions, but this legal onslaught is completely unwarranted. I arched an eyebrow, unimpressed. Indiscretions? Is that what you call defrauding a company and cheating on your wife with her own cousin? The weasel's face reddened, but I pressed on, relentless. Your client is a lying, thieving scumbag, and he's going to pay for what he's done, in full. As the legal battle raged on, Derek and Marissa's sordid affair became public knowledge, splashed across every tabloid and gossip rag. Suddenly, the perfect couple everyone had envied was a punchline, a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. Derek tried to maintain his usual bravado, sneering at reporters and issuing terse, no comments, but I could see the cracks in his facade, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Marissa, on the other hand, seemed to relish the attention, preening and posing for the cameras like a deranged socialite. That is, until the backlash from her own family hit. Her parents disowned her, her siblings cut off all contact. Even her friends abandoned her, appalled by her despicable actions. As for me, I weathered the storm with my head held high, refusing to be cowed or shamed. Derek and Marissa had made their bed, and now they could lie in it, squirming under the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny. The courtroom battles were brutal, with both sides flinging allegations and personal attacks like grenades. But thanks to Alex's legal prowess and the mountain of evidence we'd amassed, we emerged victorious time and again. Finally, after months of bitter legal warfare, the knockout blow was delivered. Derek was not only forced to relinquish control of my company, but found himself facing criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. As the judge read out the verdict, I allowed myself a satisfied smile. Derek caught my gaze, his eyes burning with impotent rage and hatred. But I didn't care. He was finished. His life in ruins. The war was over, and I had won. With Derek's assets frozen and the legal noose tightening around his neck, I expected him to slink away into the shadows, tail tucked between his legs. But the man was nothing if not a glutton for punishment. I'd barely savored my courtroom victory when my phone rang, Derek's name flashing across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered, bracing myself for the inevitable torrent of vitriol. You think you've won, don't you? He spat, his voice dripping with venom. Well, you're sadly mistaken. This isn't over, not by a long shot. I rolled my eyes, utterly unfazed by his empty bravado. Save your breath, Derek. The courts have ruled, and you've been exposed as the lying, thieving scumbag you are. It's over. There was a pause, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his devious little mind. Maybe for me, he conceded, his tone taking on a sinister edge. But what about your precious company? You really think you're going to be able to run that ship without me? A knot of dread formed in the pit of my stomach, but I refused to show any outward signs of concern. I've been running this company just fine for years, Derek. You were nothing but a leech, draining its resources for your own gain. He barked out a harsh laugh. Keep telling yourself that, sweetheart. But the truth is you're in way over your head without me. Just you wait. Your precious empire is going to come crashing down around you. The line went dead, but his words continued to echo in my mind, stoking the flames of doubt and uncertainty. Could he be right? Had I underestimated just how much control he'd wielded over the company's inner workings? I pushed the thoughts aside, refocusing my energy on securing my position and safeguarding the company from any further sabotage. With Derek's influence excised like a cancer, I set about purging his loyalists from key positions, replacing them with trusted allies. It wasn't long before the first bombshell hit. An anonymous whistleblower came forward, alleging that Derek had been cooking the books and falsifying financial reports for years. The news sent shockwaves through the company, triggering a mass exodus of investors and clients fleeing the perceived instability. I called an emergency meeting with my executive team, my expression grim. All right, people, we have a crisis on our hands. Derek's left us a lovely parting gift in the form of cooked books and shady dealings. Panic flickered across their faces, but I silenced it with a raised hand. But that ends today. From this moment on, we're going to scrub this company clean, leave no stone unturned. We're going to root out every last trace of Derek's corruption and rebuild from the ground up. There were murmurs of assent, but one voice piped up from the back of the room. With all due respect, ma'am, how can we be sure you're not just as compromised as Derek was? The accusation hung in the air like a lead balloon, but I met it head-on, unflinching. Because I'm not the one who betrayed this company for personal gain. I'm not the one who cheated and lied and stole. Derek did this, not me. I swept my gaze across the room, my expression resolute. I know I've got my work cut out for me in terms of regaining your trust, but I'm going to prove to each and every one of you that this company is in good hands, my hands. It was an uphill battle, but slowly, surely, I began to turn the tide. One by one, I won over the doubters, the skeptics, through sheer force of will and an unwavering commitment to transparency and integrity. As for Derek and Marissa, their fall from grace was as swift as it was brutal. With the legal walls closing in and their reputations in tatters, they found themselves social pariahs, shunned and ostracized by their former circles. I caught wind of Marissa's spectacular downfall. She'd been fired from her cushy marketing job, her severance package revoked in light of the scandal. Her family had disowned her, and her so-called friends had abandoned her, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. As for Derek, well, let's just say that his newfound status as a convicted felon didn't exactly open many doors in the business world. The once mighty titan had been reduced to a punchline, a cautionary tale of hubris and greed. And me? I stood at the helm of my company, battered but unbroken, a phoenix rising from the ashes of Derek's betrayal. The road ahead was long and arduous, but I was ready to rebuild, to reclaim what was mine, and to emerge stronger than ever before. Derek and Marissa had tried to break me, but in the end they had only forged me into steel. In the aftermath of Derek's dramatic unraveling, a sense of grim satisfaction washed over me. The lying, cheating scumbag had finally received his comeuppance, his life in ruins, a fitting punishment for the devastation he'd wrought. But even as I savored my hard-won victory, a nagging sense of unease gnawed at me. Derek's final threat still echoed in my mind, a dark promise that my struggles were far from over. Sure enough, it wasn't long before the other shoe dropped. I was in the middle of a meeting with the marketing team, discussing strategies to rebuild our brand's tarnished image, when Alex burst through the door, his expression thunderous. "Elena, we need to talk. Now." His tone brooked no argument. I excused myself, dread coiling in the pit of my stomach, and followed Alex to his office. He wasted no time in dropping the bombshell. "Derek's filed a lawsuit against you and the company," he growled, slamming a thick stack of papers onto his desk. "He's claiming you orchestrated a campaign of defamation and destroyed his career out of spite." White-hot fury surged through my veins as I scanned the documents. Are you kidding me? After everything that Snake did, the fraud, the embezzlement, the affair, he has the audacity to play the victim? Alex held up a placating hand. I know, and trust me, this case is weaker than a wet paper bag. but it's still going to be a massive headache, not to mention a PR nightmare. I gritted my teeth, steeling my resolve. So be it. We'll fight this like we've fought everything else Derek's thrown our way, with the truth on our side. The ensuing legal battle was nothing short of a circus, a spectacle of mudslinging and personal attacks that played out in the public eye. Derek's lawyers painted him as a tragic figure, a devoted family man, driven to desperate measures by a cold, neglectful wife. I scoffed at the absurd notion, but the accusations stung nonetheless. How dare he try to twist the narrative, to rewrite history and absolve himself of his own despicable actions? In the end, though, facts proved far more potent than fiction. With the mountain of evidence we'd amassed, financial records, witness testimonies, even Derek's own incriminating messages, his flimsy case crumbled like a house of cards. The final nail in the coffin came when Marissa took the stand. Faced with the prospect of perjury charges, she sang like a canary, spilling every sordid detail of her affair with Derek and their conspiracy to defraud my company. I'll never forget the look on Derek's face as Marissa delivered her damning testimony, his mask of righteous indignation melting away to reveal the sniveling coward beneath. In that moment, he knew he was beaten, his last desperate gambit thwarted. When the verdict finally came down, it was a resounding victory for our side. Derek's lawsuit was dismissed, and he was ordered to pay exorbitant legal fees and damages. But that wasn't the end of his humiliation. As I left the courthouse, flanked by Alex and a throng of reporters, Derek emerged from the building, his head hung in defeat. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of pure, unadulterated hatred burning in his gaze. "You won't get away with this," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "I'll make sure you pay for what you've done, even if it's the last thing I do." A mirthless chuckle escaped my lips as I regarded the pathetic shell of a man before me. "You're the one who's going to pay, Derek, for the rest of your miserable life." With that, I turned on my heel and strode away, leaving him to stew in the wreckage of his own making. The war was over, and I had emerged victorious, but at what cost? As the celebrations died down and the dust settled, I found myself alone in my office, staring out at the city skyline. What should have been a moment of triumph felt hollow somehow, tainted by the bitter aftertaste of revenge. Had it all been worth it? The lies, the deception, the scorched earth tactics? Or had I lost a piece of myself along the way, sacrificed on the altar of vindication? A quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered that perhaps there was another way, a path that didn't involve sinking to Derek's level of depravity. But it was too late for such musings now. The die had been cast, and there was no going back. All I could do was soldier on, rebuild what had been broken, and pray that the hollow ache in my chest would eventually fade. Derek and Marissa had been vanquished, but at what price? Only time would tell if the cost of my vengeance was one I could truly stomach. In the weeks following my courtroom triumph over Derek's petty lawsuit, an uneasy truce settled over the battlefield. The war may have been won, but the scars ran deep for both sides. I threw myself into the task of rebuilding, working tirelessly to restore my company's tarnished reputation and repair the damage wrought by Derek's deception. With each small victory, a new client, a positive press mention, a rising stock price, the hollow ache in my chest began to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. Derek, on the other hand, had well and truly fallen from grace. His once glittering career lay in ruins, the mighty Titan reduced to a cautionary tale. I caught wind of his sordid downfall through the grapevine. No reputable firm would touch him, his reputation forever tainted by his criminal convictions. As for Marissa, well, let's just say karma has a way of evening the scales. It was a crisp autumn morning when Alex strode into my office, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "You'll never guess what fresh hell our favorite dysfunctional duo has landed themselves in," he announced, settling into the chair opposite my desk. I arched an eyebrow, equal parts intrigued and wary. "Do I even want to know?" Alex's grin widened as he slid a folder across the desk. "See for yourself." I flipped it open, my eyes widening as I scanned the contents. "You can't be serious." "As a heart attack," Alex confirmed. "Derek and Marissa are being charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, you name it. Seems our little whistleblower friend was just the tip of the iceberg." A bitter chuckle escaped my lips as I digested the news. I never thought I'd see the day, Well, believe it, sister, Alex crowed. Those two snakes are finally getting the book thrown at them. Hard. In the days that followed, the sordid details of Derek and Marissa's far-reaching criminal enterprise trickled out, each revelation more shocking than the last. They'd been living a double life, using my company as a front to funnel illicit funds, evade taxes, and line their own pockets. The evidence was damning, overwhelming, and this time there was no wiggle room, no legal loopholes for Derek's team of shysters to exploit. He and Marissa were well and truly boxed in, the walls closing in around them. I'll never forget the day they were led into the courtroom in handcuffs, a pathetic sight to behold. Derek, once so poised and confident, hung his head in shame, his expensive suit rumpled and disheveled. Marissa, for her part, maintained a haughty air of defiance, but I could see the fear flickering in her eyes. The trial was little more than a formality, a public crucifixion to lay bare their myriad sins. Witness after witness took the stand, each more damaging than the last, until the weight of their guilt became too massive to deny. When the verdict finally came down, guilty on all counts, a weight lifted from my shoulders. It was over, truly and finally over. Derek and Marissa's twisted game of deceit and betrayal had been blown wide open, their misdeeds exposed for the world to see. As they were led away in chains, Marissa caught my eye, her gaze burning with impotent rage. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Here were two souls so consumed by greed and hubris that they'd sacrificed everything, their reputations, their freedom, their very souls. Derek, on the other hand, refused to meet my gaze, his eyes downcast in bitter resignation. The mighty had well and truly fallen, brought low by his own avarice and depravity. In the aftermath, as the dust settled and the media circus died down, I found myself standing atop the rubble of our once idyllic lives, a victor surveying the hard-won battlefield. It was finally over. But as I looked out over the smoldering wreckage, I couldn't help but wonder, at what cost had this victory come? What parts of myself had I sacrificed in pursuit of vengeance? And was it all truly worth it in the end? Only time would tell, I supposed, as I turned my back on the past and strode forward into an uncertain future. The war was won, but the scars would linger. In the months following Derek and Marissa's dramatic downfall, an uneasy calm settled over my life. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a strange, unsettling calm in its wake. With the legal battles and PR firestorms firmly in the rearview mirror, I found myself adrift, unmoored from the singular purpose that had driven me for so long. Vengeance had been my guiding star, my reason for breathing, and now that it had been achieved, I felt oddly hollow, untethered. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In the immediate aftermath of Derek and Marissa's sentencing, a wave of relief washed over me. The nightmare was finally over, the demons that had haunted me for so long vanquished. I could breathe again, live again, free from the weight of their betrayal. Or so I thought. The first few weeks passed in a blur of celebration and congratulations. Alex threw a raucous party at his place, a veritable who's who of the city's legal elite in attendance, all eager to toast the downfall of the dastardly duo. I plastered on a smile and made the rounds, accepting drinks and backslaps with practiced grace. But underneath the veneer of polite socialization, a part of me felt off, out of place, like an interloper at my own victory party. As the weeks stretched into months, that sense of disconnection only deepened. Logically, I knew I should have been over the moon. I'd not only survived Derek's betrayal but emerged victorious, my reputation and company intact. But the nagging feeling persisted, like a tiny voice whispering in the back of my mind. Was it really a victory if it had cost me a piece of my soul? I tried to lose myself in work, throwing every ounce of my energy into rebuilding my company's battered public image. New initiatives were launched, charitable foundations established, all in the name of scrubbing the stain left by Derek's misdeeds. And yet, no matter how many 16-hour days I pulled, how many millions I funneled into good PR, that empty ache lingered, a constant companion I couldn't seem to shake. It all came to a head one night as I sat alone in my office, staring out at the city skyline. A half-empty bottle of scotch sat on my desk, the amber liquid swirling in the glass clutched in my hand. A soft rap at the door roused me from my reverie. "Come in," I called out, not bothering to turn around. "Working late again, I see." Alex's familiar drawl reached my ears as he settled into the chair opposite my desk. You know, they make these newfangled things called vacations these days. Might want to look into one. I huffed out a mirthless chuckle, swirling the contents of my glass. You know me, Alex. No rest for the wicked and all that. He was silent for a beat, studying me with those perceptive eyes of his. You don't seem terribly celebratory for someone who just took down public enemy number 1. I sighed, finally meeting his gaze. I don't know, Alex. I should be over the moon, right? Derek and Marissa are behind bars, my company's back on track. But I trailed off, struggling to put the gnawing disquiet into words. But something's still eating at you, he finished, giving me a knowing look. You got your revenge, Elena. The question is, was it worth it? His words hung in the air, heavy and laden with implication. Was it worth it? The lies, the deception, the scorched earth campaign that had nearly consumed me? In that moment, the weight of everything I'd sacrificed in pursuit of vengeance came crashing down around me. The person I'd allowed myself to become, the moral lines I'd crossed, had it truly been a fair trade for seeing Derek punished? The bitter taste of self-loathing flooded my mouth, and I slammed my glass down with a trembling hand. No, it wasn't worth it. The admission hung between us, raw and painful. After a long, weighty silence, Alex spoke up, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Then it's time to leave the past in the past, my friend. Time to start over, to become the person you want to be, not the one forged in the fires of revenge. His words rang true, a clarion call amidst the storm of self-doubt that had consumed me for so long. It was time to let go, to shed the burdens of the past and step into the light. A fragile smile tugged at my lips as I met Alex's gaze, the first sparks of hope flickering to life in my chest. You're right, I whispered, the weight already beginning to lift from my shoulders. It's time for a new beginning. The road ahead would be long, fraught with challenges and inner demons to conquer, but for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt a sense of purpose unclouded by rage or thirst for retribution. It was time to be reborn, to rise like a phoenix from the ashes of my own making. Derek and Marissa's betrayal may have broken me once, but I was determined to emerge from the crucible stronger, wiser, my soul intact. A new chapter was beginning, and this time, the pen was firmly in my own hand. The piercing scream ripped through my chest before I could stop it. There they were, tangled together like poisonous vines, my husband and my stepmother, locked in a sordid embrace on the kitchen counter. My eyes stung with unshed tears as Alex scrambled off Lana, his limp excuse for a shirt hanging open. Bryn, this isn't... He couldn't even finish his thought. Lana simply smirked, not an ounce of shame etched on her face as she smoothed her rumpled silk robe. Hello, dear. Didn't expect you home so soon, did you? Her saccharine tone sliced through me like shards of glass. You vile snake! I hurled the words at her, chest heaving. How could you, both of you? Alex opened his mouth again, but I cut him off with a hand slicing through the air. Save it. I don't want to hear another word from you. Pivoting on my heel, I stormed out of that wretched kitchen, slamming the front door behind me with enough force to rattle the windows. Hot tears streamed down my cheeks as I climbed into my car and peeled out of the driveway, desperate to put distance between me and that nightmare. I must have driven aimlessly for hours, the weight of their betrayal crushing my very soul. Lana, the woman who had stepped into my life as a stepmother when I was just 16, carrying on an affair with my own husband behind my back. And Alex, the one person I'd thought I could trust without question. How could I have been so blind? When I finally returned home well past midnight, the house was blissfully empty. I made a beeline for the den, scooping up the mail and papers scattered across the desk. That's when a plain white envelope caught my eye, addressed to me in my father's familiar scrawl. With trembling hands, I tore it open. Several pages fell out, covered in Dad's tight penmanship. My eyes immediately landed on the top line. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. Dad's words jumped off the page, each line a punch to the gut. I'm sorry I couldn't share this with you in person, but I've long had my suspicions about Lana. That woman is rotten to the core, manipulative and hell-bent on sinking her claws into our family's wealth by any means necessary. I sucked in a sharp breath, the pieces slowly falling into place. Dad had tried to warn me, but I'd been too blind to see Lana's true nature. Too consumed by the relief of having a mother figure after Mom's passing to look past the sugary facade. A noise from the hallway made me stiffen. Through the open doorway, I saw Lana saunter by in her silk robe, not a care in the world. Like she hadn't just decimated my life mere hours ago. "You lying snake!" The biting words burst from my lips before I could stop them. Lana whirled around, eyes widening in mock innocence. "Why, Bryn, whatever is the matter?" "Don't play dumb with me." I shook the letter at her. "Dad knew all about your twisted games. He tried to stop you from worming your way into this family's life." A flicker of anger flashed across her face before the syrupy mask slid back into place. "Your father was a paranoid old fool obsessed with fending off delusions. I pitied him, really." White-hot rage lanced through me, and I moved towards her, fists clenched, ready to unleash years of pent-up fury. But she only laughed, taking a step back with a shake of her head. "I'd think twice about that if I were you, dear. Your father's ramblings won't hold up in court against the truth." With that parting shot, she turned and slinked away, leaving me seething in her wake. Gripping the letter, I stalked into the living room and grabbed my cell phone, scrolling to find the number Dad had left. Mara Lewis, his attorney. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. "Mara Lewis. Miss Lewis, it's Bryn Ellis. I need to meet with you as soon as possible regarding my father's estate." There was a pause. "Of course. I've been expecting your call. Shall we say 3 p.m. this afternoon at my office?" "I'll be there," I replied through gritted teeth. If Lana thought she could slither her way out of this, she was sorely mistaken. Dad had left me the key to exposing her twisted lies, and I wasn't about to let his final wishes go unanswered. She was going to pay for destroying my family, no matter what it took. By the time I ended the call, my path forward was clear. If Lana wanted truth and consequences, I would make damn sure that's exactly what she got. I stalked into Mara's office precisely at 3 p.m., my heels striking the marble floor with purpose. The impeccably dressed attorney rose from behind her desk, expression impassive. "Miss Ellis, thank you for coming in on such short notice." She waved a hand towards the plush leather chairs facing her desk. "Please have a seat." I sank into one of the chairs, back ramrod straight as I met her cool gaze. "I want to know everything. What evidence my father had against Lana, and what legal avenues are available to me." Mara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Very well." She reached into her desk drawer and retrieved a thick manila envelope. "These are the files your father left pertaining to his concerns over your stepmother." My fingers trembled slightly as I accepted the weighty bundle. Flipping it open, I scanned the pages. Reams of financial statements, phone records, even photos capturing Lana in compromising situations. As you can see, your father was quite thorough in documenting his findings. Mara allowed the faintest hint of admiration to color her tone. However, much of this intelligence alone will be difficult to prosecute without corroborating evidence from other parties. I looked up sharply. "Are you saying Lana could still worm her way out of this?" "Potentially." Mara laced her fingers together atop the desk. "Which is why we must pursue a multi-pronged strategy. Legal proceedings, but also more personal venues of exposing the truth." A tiny smirk played across my lips as understanding dawned. "You mean going public and destroying her reputation beyond repair?" The barest hint of a nod. "Precisely. Draw her deceit into the light so utterly that no courtroom theatrics can obscure it." My gaze hardened to steel. "Do it. I want the whole book thrown at that conniving witch, financially, socially, all of it. I'll get you whatever information you need to leave her life in ashes." Mara's expression didn't flicker, but I could have sworn I saw a glint of approval in those steely eyes. "Very good, Miss Ellis. Then let's begin making preparations, shall we?" As I exited the office, I was acutely aware of the warpath stretching before me. Lana had waged her deception in the shadows, but by the time I was done, her wicked truth would be on display for the whole world to revile. The game was on. When I arrived home, Lana was lounging on the patio in that damned silk robe, sipping a glass of Chardonnay. She cast me a poisonous smile over the rim. "Why the grim look of determination, dear? Nothing unpleasant from the attorney I trust?" Digging my nails into my palms, I forced myself not to rise to the bait. "You'll see soon enough." With that, I brushed past her, heading inside to set my plans into motion. If the Viper thought she'd already won, she was sorely mistaken. I was just getting started. My first call was to Sam Jenkins, the one person I trusted wholeheartedly, my best friend since junior high. When she answered, I wasted no time launching into the sordid tale. "Oh my God, Bryn!" Even over the phone, her shock was palpable. "I can't believe Alex did that to you? And with your stepmother? Those depraved scum!" I laughed darkly. "Oh, just wait until you hear the rest. This goes so much deeper." By the time I finished recounting Dad's letter and Lana's damning past, Sam was fuming. "That evil, manipulative witch. We have to take her down, Bryn. She can't be allowed to get away with what she's done to your family." Exactly. I exhaled slowly, appreciating the sense of ally I now had at my side. "That's why I need your help. We're going to expose Lana for the venomous snake she is, then make sure she can never slither back into a position to hurt anyone else." There was steely determination in Sam's tone. "Just say the word, B. I'm in all the way, whatever it takes." As I disconnected the call, lightning crackled outside, a tempest brewing to match the storm I was about to unleash. The sun was setting on Lana Winter's web of lies. The next few weeks were a dizzying blur of covert meetings, strategizing with Sam and Mara to meticulously construct our multi-pronged attack. Lana didn't suspect a thing as she swanned around the house, periodically shooting me smug looks that made my blood boil. If only she knew what was coming. The first phase began with an anonymous online expose that Sam had expertly crafted, laying out the lurid details of Lana's tawdry affair with my husband in cold, hard facts. The story spread like wildfire, scandalous screenshots circulating rapidly across social media. I'll never forget the look of shock on Lana's face when she finally saw the viral firestorm erupting around her. "What is this?" She gestured wildly at her laptop, face flushed with rage. "Some kind of sick prank?" I strolled over, feigning nonchalance as I scanned the screen. "Oh my, someone certainly did dig up some unsavory details about your personal life." I clicked my tongue in mock sympathy. "Not a good look, Lana. So much for keeping up that sugary facade. She rounded on me, eyes blazing like hellfire. "You did this?" I shrugged one shoulder lazily. "Can't control the internet, can you?" Allowing a small, satisfied smile to curve my lips, I turned and headed for the door. "But hey, look on the bright side. At least now everyone knows the real you." Her screams and curses followed me down the hallway, bringing a wicked gratification. That was just the opening salvo. The next phase unfolded in a rapid succession of haymakers. Carefully tailored leaks to the right sources, exposing Lana's shady business dealings and financial improprieties. Records of offshore bank accounts, incriminating call recordings, whistleblowers emerging from the shadows of her past, painting a damning portrait of greed and exploitation. Wave after wave of evidence battered her so-called good name, and with each fresh public humiliation, I could see the strain spreading across Alex's features. Poor sap, he'd believed Lana's con job too, letting himself get tangled up in her lies. Well, live by deception, die by deception, as they say. As the hammer continued to drop, the elite country club where Lana had hobnobbed with high society revoked her membership, effective immediately. Friendships fractured within days, former allies distancing themselves from the maelstrom of scandal now swirling around her. I savored every ignominious moment from a carefully calculated distance, emerging again only when the final crushing blow was prepared to strike. It was the night of the charity gala held annually by Lana's once-respected charitable foundation, an evening where she'd always taken great pains to present her saintly public visage. Well, that mask would shatter into a million pieces tonight. Sam and I positioned ourselves across the street from the grand ballroom entrance, dressed to the nines and clutching crystal flutes of champagne. At precisely 8 p.m., a towering billboard blazed to life on the adjacent building, emblazoned with a single phrase in garish red font: "Lane Winters, a legacy of lies, the full uncovered story." Beneath it, a QR code linked to a viral data dump, all of Dad's compiled evidence, the financial records and whistleblower testimonies presented in one thorough, utterly damning package for the world to consume. Within minutes, camera flashes were popping in a frenzied strobe across the red carpet as guests arrived. Those who saw the blistering billboard gaped in shock, muttering in phones held aloft, spreading the QR code like a contagion. Finally, Lana appeared in the center of the spectacle, eyes bulging in outrage and disbelief as the realization of her annihilated reputation sank in. For one shining moment, her masquerade crumbled completely, exposing the true, blackened soul beneath. Another slow smile crept across my lips as I sipped my champagne and watched the Empress suffer a very public, very deserved execution. The first phase of my vengeance was complete. Time to turn my attention to the legal battlefield that awaited, and leave Lana to drown in the ocean of her own deceptions. The days following the charity gala expose were a blissful reprieve as Lana went into full damage control mode. The house was mercifully quiet. She and Alex holed up separately with their lawyers, no doubt scrambling for some Hail Mary to counter the mountain of evidence we detonated. Good luck with that. Predictably, the first incoming volley was Lana summoning me to the den with a curt, "We need to talk." I strolled in to find her perched like a coiled viper on the chaise, eyes glinting with a mixture of wounded fury and smug calculation. Clearly she fancied herself holding some trump card. "Well, I see you've had your fun with your little internet theatrics." Her lips twisted in a mocking sneer. "But now the real game begins, pet. Unless you want to spend the rest of your days drowning in litigation, you'll back down immediately." I raised an eyebrow coolly. "Is that so? And what leverage could you possibly have, Lana?" Quick as a cobra's strike, she seized a folder from the side table and flung it at me. "See for yourself, dear." I crouched to scoop up the scattered contents, bank statements, property records, all laying out mine and Alex's joint assets in exacting detail. "What is this?" "Your Achilles' heel." A lupine smile curved her lips as the trap sprung shut. "Everything you've attempted so far is circumstantial at best, but with one simple lawsuit, your darling husband and I can ensure you're left with nothing but the clothes on your back." A cold shudder of realization trickled down my spine as her ploy crystallized. Of course. Attack my financial foundation in tandem with the smear campaign. Bleed me dry through the legal system while simultaneously stripping me of credibility. Cunning little viper, I had to hand it to her. But if she thought unveiled threats would make me balk, she had sorely underestimated me. Straightening, I met her wolfish stare with an arctic one of my own. "You can posture and grandstand all you want, Lana. It won't make a damn bit of difference." I allowed a grim smile to tug the corner of my mouth. "I have the receipts, as they say. The money trails, the testimony, all of it. You're going down in flames one way or another." Her serpentine eyes narrowed dangerously. "We'll see about that, won't we?" With that parting shot still ringing in the air between us, I turned and marched from the room, the first tremors of the legal earthquake we were about to endure shuddering beneath my feet. Mara was waiting in her office a short while later when I swept through the door and took a seat across from her desk. "Let's go on the offensive," were the first words out of my mouth. A flicker of understanding passed behind her eyes as she rifled through a stack of documents. "Of course, we anticipated this maneuver when formulating strategy." She pushed a dossier across the desk towards me. "Here are the grounds we'll pursue. Alienation of affection to form the basis of your divorce proceedings against Mr. Hammond. Given the clear evidence of infidelity and marital misconduct on his part, we have more than sufficient legal footing." My finger traced the printed words, relief loosening the knot that had formed in my chest. Divorce the cheating bastard, of course. Step 1. And for the vindictive viper? I scooped up the next section of the file detailing counts of fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. Mara allowed the ghost of a grim smile. "I took the liberty of reaching out to a few interested parties regarding your stepmother's activities." She slid a document across the desk. "The IRS, SEC, you name it. By the time we're through, Lana Winter's tangled financial web will be laid bare, along with the full extent of her years-long con." "Brilliant," I breathed, already envisioning her highfalutin lifestyle crumbling away to nothing but 4 drab prison walls. We moved swiftly and decisively, on all fronts. Mara's voice carried a lethal edge, a lioness scenting blood. "Lana fancies herself a master manipulator, exploiting the system to her benefit. Well, now she'll learn the true power of that very system when wielded against her." A feral smile curved my lips as the first papers were drawn up, the battle fully joined. Game on, Lana. Don't bother hiring extra security. There's nowhere left for you to hide. The rules of engagement were set, and I wouldn't rest until I'd claimed victory through sheer, overwhelming force. By the time this was over, that woman's life would be in ashes at my feet. The next several months were a dizzying cyclone of legal filings, deposition hearings, and mounting media frenzies as the twin proceedings against Lana and Alex accelerated. Mara was an indomitable force, calmly dismantling every underhanded tactic and angle of attack their lawyers attempted. I lost count of how many times I was grilled under oath, forced to recount in granular detail the undoing of my marriage. Each new dissolution hearing was akin to lancing a fresh wound, raw anger and humiliation burning in my throat. But I kept my composure, didn't dare let Lana or that sniveling weasel Alex see me flinch, no matter how many times Alex's lawyer tried to impugn my character or cast aspersions about my motives. Let them sling mud, I thought coldly. Won't change the truth staring them in the face. Speaking of which, Lana's legal battle was rapidly devolving into a masterclass of denial and misdirection. Her lawyers deployed every trick in the book to cast doubt on the mountain of incriminating evidence we'd amassed. Forged documents, they claimed, falsified testimony from paid actors, a coordinated campaign of lies by a bitter ex-wife desperately clinging to her material lifestyle. I had to smother laughter as I watched their clown show unfold in utter seriousness before the bench. Did Lana really think those third-rate theatrics would hold up against the towering edifice of proof we'd constructed? Mara shredded each absurd claim to bits with almost bored efficiency. Forensic records, rock-solid witness accounts, every damning data point laid out with the ruthless precision of a scalpel. And through it all, I took petty satisfaction in watching Lana's glaring weakness on the stand, as her artfully composed facade increasingly dissolved into flop sweat and desperate stammering. For once, the master manipulator had no script to fall back on, no lies to distort the corrosive truth burning her alive in that courtroom. The weeks ticked by with remorseless efficiency as the dual cases built to an inexorable climax. Lana's blustering faltered, her hired guns of lawyers slowly resigning themselves to the futility of their straits. At last, the day of reckoning dawned, a final trial date to decide both my divorce and the civil case against my shattered stepmother. I dressed simply but sharply, fixing my hair into a tight chignon as I steeled myself for the fight still to come. Alex and Lana were already seated at the defendant's table when I strode into the courtroom, heads bent in whispered conference with their haggard legal teams. They turned as one in my direction, twin expressions of loathing and fear. For the first time, I allowed myself a thin, predatory smile. They should be afraid of the all-consuming justice I was about to unleash. The proceedings passed in a whirlwind of procedural formalities, evidence rehashed, and accounts culminating to their inevitable apex. When the jury finally returned with their verdict, a deafening hush fell over the gallery. On the charge of felony embezzlement, how do you find? The forewoman stood, shoulders squared. We, the jury, find the defendant Lana Winters guilty. An electric shock seemed to judder through the courtroom. I could have sworn I heard the sharp crack of Lana's composure shattering in that instant as the words detonated in her ears. Tears began leaking from her eyes as the judge continued the stony pronouncement. Furthermore, the court finds sufficient grounds for civil tort based on alienation of affection in the matter of Bryn Ellis versus Alex Hammond. Divorce proceedings will commence immediately. A keening wail tore from Lana's throat as the full weight of loss crashed down upon her. Reputation, riches, the gilded facade of her life, all of it sledgehammered into rubble. And there, in the burning pyre of her ruination, the chains of bitterness that had shackled my soul for so long finally fell away in sublime release. Over. It was finally, utterly over. I took one last look at the shuddering, broken thing crumpled in the defendant's chair. The beast that had nearly destroyed me now caged at last. Not a shred of pity, mercy, or remorse remained between us. Only the karmic scales bearing down with implacable purgative force. As the bailiffs moved to take them away, Lana looked up at me with reddened, hateful eyes. But the iron curtain of my stare didn't waver until her disgrace finally dissolved behind the towering barricades of institutional gray. In the end, courage and truth had prevailed over calculation and venom, and although the road here had been brutal, my peace was finally restored. The rest would pass like a fever dream blasted away on the cleansing wind of justice served. I was free, reborn from the ashes of betrayal into someone tempered, someone stronger than I'd ever imagined. As I exited the courthouse and strode into the brilliant daylight, the specter of the past crumbling like ashes away, I inhaled the crisp air of my new life, untethered, inviolable, and fueled by deepest resilience. My vengeance was complete, but my true victory had only just begun. In the days and weeks following the court verdicts, an eerie silence descended upon my life. The seething crusade that had fueled my every waking breath abruptly faded, leaving a void I didn't quite know how to fill. Gone were the whispered strategizing sessions with Mara, the burning need to scour legal documents for any advantage over Lana's wicked machinations. Even taking Sam's calls, those pillars of support and levity as we dismantled my traitorous adversaries, started to feel like echoes of a life no longer mine. The cathartic release of justice served should have ushered in a tidal wave of closure, of inner peace regained. So why did I feel so unmoored? Adrift in the vacuum of my own victory? Perhaps it was the sudden quiet allowing darker reflections to encroach, looming specters of doubt creeping in from the shadows of my mind. What if I went too far in my crusade for vengeance? Sure, Lana and Alex had been snakes, betraying me in unforgivable ways, but the scorched earth demolition of their lives, the relentless and frankly gleeful unraveling of Lana's influence, resources, and very identity, had that crossed some moral event horizon? I tried to shove the thought aside, to revel in my hard-won vindication. But there was no denying the flashes of my own ruthlessness that kept surfacing, unbidden. The cold, unflinching determination to lay waste to anyone and anything standing in my path. Mara's words echoed with disquieting clarity. Lana fancies herself a master manipulator, exploiting the system to her benefit. Well, now she'll learn the true power of that very system when wielded against her. Had I simply become the reverse side of that very same coin? The doubts gnawed and festered, driving me late one night to the very place where this nightmare had begun. My stately home in the suburbs sat hauntingly silent under the pale moonlight. I let myself in with the spare key, wandering from room to empty room like a restless specter. So many memories echoed from every corner, both beautiful and terrible, all now cast in the cold, harsh light of irredeemable deceit. The kitchen, garish and obscene. The den, awash in Dad's mournful admonitions. The bedroom, a blighted sanctuary. By the time I reached the living room fireplace, huddled on the hearth in the darkness, bone-deep weariness threatened to overwhelm me. Who was I now in the ashes of this harrowing ordeal? Some hardened, embittered mercenary of my own vengeance, or a tenacious survivor determined to wrest back her dignity from the jaws of destruction? My gaze drifted over the mantel, lingering on the solitary framed photo, a happier time when the future seemed bright before the first hairline cracks appeared in the facade. I brushed the glass with my fingertips, tears stinging my eyes. How had it all gone so wrong? When did the downward spiral pick up that inexorable momentum towards mutually assured ruination? A soft sound made me stiffen, whirling to find the intruder, only to freeze as Sam padded into the pool of dim light. "Bryn?" She spoke softly, eyes filled with gentle concern. "I got your message. You said you needed." Her voice trailed off as I let the tightly wound mask slip, hot tears spilling in silent streams down my cheeks. It was too much, the weight of this whole shattered saga. I craved the absolution that had always seemed so clear before. But no platitudes came as Sam gathered me in her arms, simply holding on as the anguish of the last several months poured out in ragged sobs. For the first time since uncovering the betrayal, I allowed myself to shatter completely, burying my face in her shoulder as the foundations cracked open and the flood washed over. In that moment of abject brokenness, the hardened shell of victorious Bryn finally disintegrated, leaving only the raw, wounded soul desperate to find its way back towards the light. Perhaps this keening release would prove the catharsis I'd been seeking all along. The purging of toxic rage to make way for rebirth, rising up from the scorched earth left in vengeance's wake. Only time would tell. For now, I simply surrendered to the corrosive waves crashing over me, allowing the last remnants of my former life to dissolve into the ether. My road to healing stretched before me, arduous yet infinitely promising for what lay at its end, inner peace at last reclaimed. As Sam held vigil over my tear-streaked epiphany, the bitter taste of retribution gradually gave way to the promise of something far sweeter on the horizon, a true chance to begin anew. In the weeks following my cathartic breakdown at the old house, a profound shift took hold within me. It started small, rediscovering simple joys like morning coffee on the patio or evening walks around the neighborhood, mundane routines that had been crushed under the weight of trauma and obsession. Gradually, I felt the icy grip of bitterness and anger loosening its hold over my heart, replaced by a dawning sense of freedom and infinite possibility stretching out before me. When the final divorce paperwork arrived with a stark finality, I simply filed it away without fanfare. The severing of that wretched bond with Alex stirred none of the old vengeful urges, only a vaguely bittersweet feeling. Rather than dwell on the death of what was, all my energy channeled towards dreaming of what could be. It all culminated one bright spring morning over brunch with Sam as I announced my decision. "I'm selling the house." She paused, fork laden with Belgian waffle hovering midair. "You are?" "Whoa, that's huge, B." A small smile played over her lips as understanding blossomed. "Symbolic fresh start and all that?" I nodded, unable to contain my own widening grin. "Exactly. That place holds too many toxic memories, like a darkened void I keep getting inextricably pulled back into." I took a deep breath, savoring the rising sense of lightness in my chest. It's time to let go fully and move forward, you know? Sam reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm proud of you for taking that leap," she said simply, eyes shining. We'd come such an unimaginably long way since those early, anguished days following the betrayal's discovery. From there, it was a whirlwind of action, hiring an elite realtor, sorting through our old life's worth of possessions, itemizing what to take and what to discard. With each box taped up, an item crossed off the list, I felt layers of my former self being gently shed and set aside. Finally, the big day arrived with the ringing of the doorbell, a couple straight off the real estate marketing brochure. Young, impeccably dressed, beaming at the prospect of their new dream home as I greeted them with the keys. I led them through the stately foyer towards the living area, though my strides gradually slowed as a clutch of bittersweet memories resurfaced. Flashes of holidays spent with Dad, laughter ringing through the space, recollections of smiling, promising days when this rambling manor had radiated warmth and joy, before the rot had set in and poisoned it all from within. The wife seemed to sense my pensive mood as she laid a gentle hand on my arm. "You've made so many wonderful memories here, I can tell." She gave a reassuring smile. "But I promise we'll fill this place with brand new joys of our own." I blinked, momentarily caught off guard by her perceptiveness, before nodding slowly. "I hope you do." With that, I pressed the keys into her palm and strode out onto the front path one final time. Pausing to drink in the elegant facade for the last time, now divested of its sordid significance. This chapter was officially closed, soon to be replaced by happier days in the making. My journey continued ever onward and upward. Over the next few months, the windfall from the profitable sale, combined with my meager inheritance and court settlement, allowed me to slowly rebuild my life through more positive, rewarding outlets. I rededicated myself to my marketing career with a vengeance, rising swiftly through the ranks and exploring new entrepreneurial opportunities. But even more fulfilling were the passion projects, like spearheading a nonprofit for women affected by abuse and financial dissolution. Each micro act of service, of selfless giving back, was like a healing balm applied against the wounds of my former trauma. Where anger and hatred had once festered, compassion and optimism now blossomed in their place. And when a potential new romantic connection gradually materialized, I felt unshakably self-assured in walking that path, buoyed by the rediscovered strength of my convictions. I was Bryn Ellis, bold survivor reborn. Master of my own destiny, free from the shackles of others' deceptions. The rising dawn of a new lifetime of possibilities stretched gloriously ahead in reverent silence. No further words were required for the shining truth that filled my soul on this day. I had confronted the darkest nights. I had waged the battles that defined me. and from the searing crucible of anguish, I emerged incandescent, inviolable, and infinitely wiser. My vengeance was complete. But more importantly, my true victory had only just begun. The sound of my purse unzipping made me jolt upright on the living room couch. My heart raced as I spotted Kyle, my new stepson, rifling through it greedily. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, anger surging through me. Kyle froze, clutching a wad of bills in his hand. "I was just borrowing some cash," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. I marched over and snatched my purse back. "You can't just steal from me. That money was for groceries." He glared at me defiantly. "Since when do I need permission to take what's mine? My dad makes enough to cover the little you spend." The sheer audacity of his words left me stunned. How did this entitled brat think he could justify thievery under my own roof? Alan rushed in from the kitchen, alerted by the commotion. "What's going on?" "Your son here helped himself to cash from my purse. Again," I said through gritted teeth. Alan's expression hardened as he turned to Kyle. "Son, you know you can't just take things without asking, especially from Marlene." "Why not?" Kyle scoffed. "You're the one who married this broke widow and brought her into our family." The venom in his words struck like vicious blows. I recoiled, feeling like an unwanted outsider being ungratefully tolerated in their home. Alan stepped towards Kyle, his fists clenched. "That's enough. You'll treat Marlene with respect. She's your stepmother now, and this is her house too." "Oh yeah? Well, maybe if you hadn't wasted your money on this loser." In a flash, Alan grabbed Kyle by the collar and shoved him against the wall. I gasped, my heart pounding frantically. "Don't you ever speak about her like that again," Alan growled, his face contorted with rage I'd never seen before. "Get out of my sight before I really lose it." Kyle shrugged off Alan's grip, straightening his shirt as he headed for the door. "Whatever, old man. You're both pathetic." The front door slammed, leaving Alan and I alone in a tense silence. He buried his face in his hands, sighing heavily. I'm so sorry you had to see that, Marlene." His voice quivered with a mix of anger and dismay. "No, I'm the one who's sorry," I said, fighting back tears. "If I'd known your son was going to cause so much drama, I never would have." "Don't say that." Alan gently took my hands in his. "Kyle's issues aren't your fault. I'll deal with him." I stared back at my new husband, my heart aching with doubts and insecurities. This wasn't the fresh start I'd envisioned when I agreed to marry Alan and move into his home. Kyle's resentment towards me had manifested more venomously than I could have imagined. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a storm that would shake the very foundations of my life. A darkness loomed on the horizon, and the relative peace I'd found after my first husband's passing was about to be shattered. Later that night, Alan and I sat in tense silence at the dinner table, both of us too shaken to have much appetite. The earlier blow-up with Kyle had cast a dark cloud over our newly merged household. "I need to explain some things about Kyle," Alan finally said, pushing his half-eaten plate away. "Things I probably should have told you before we got married." I felt a knot forming in my stomach, bracing myself for whatever troubles lay beneath the surface of his son's repulsive behavior. Alan took a deep breath. "Kyle's mother and we had a really nasty divorce when he was 14. Lots of screaming matches and ugly custody battles. She managed to turn him against me for years with her vicious lies." He shook his head slowly. "Then she hooked up with this real scumbag boyfriend who introduced Kyle to drugs, petty crime, you name it. By the time I got him back, he was already deep into that world, stealing, selling drugs, running with a bad crew." My eyes widened in disbelief. My God, I had no idea it was that bad. He's been in real legal trouble? "More than once," Alan said grimly. "Theft, possession charges, you name it. He's pulled himself out of some deep holes but keeps finding his way back into them." I stared at him, aghast. "If he's really that messed up, how could you allow him to just move in here after we married? He's putting us both at risk." "Because he's my son," Alan snapped, defensiveness flaring in his eyes. "Despite all his screw-ups, I can't just abandon him. He's got nobody else in this world." I wanted to argue, to insist that Kyle's very presence was a clear threat to the peaceful life I craved, the life I thought I was signing up for by marrying Alan. But I could see the anguish and guilt weighing heavily on my new husband's shoulders. "I'm sorry," I said, reaching across the table to grasp his hand. I know you're in an impossible situation as his dad. We'll get through this together, okay? Alan squeezed my hand tightly and managed a pained smile. You have no idea how much it means to hear you say that. Most other women would have run for the hills by now. I tried to make light of the situation. Well, I'm too stubborn and strong-willed to let a little thing like your criminal son scare me off. We both managed a gentle laugh, momentarily breaking the tension. But as Alan headed to take a shower, leaving me alone at the table, a cold realization crept over me. The casual theft from my purse had been just the tip of the iceberg. By welcoming Kyle into our home, we'd opened the door to a world of darkness, illegal activities, violence, and God knows what other dangers. I remembered the cocky smirk on his face as he insulted me mere hours ago. There was something chillingly sinister lurking behind those eyes, far beyond the brashness of typical teenage rebellion. A shudder ran down my spine. Had I grossly underestimated the depravity of this boy? No, this man whose twisted path in life could easily bring ruin to the new dream I was trying to build? I knew in that moment that dark days lay ahead. Kyle's very presence had instantly transformed my new marriage from a longed-for sanctuary into a minefield of constantly looking over my shoulder. And as I absorbed the full scope of the situation, Alan had gradually let slip, one thing became crystallized in my mind. That vile, manipulative snake was not going to take away my hard-won chance at happiness without a brutal fight. In the weeks that followed, Kyle's audacious demands and destructive behavior only escalated. It was as if he viewed our home as his personal playground, thinking he could treat Alan and I as his servants. I need some extra cash, he declared one morning, barging into the kitchen while I prepared breakfast. My car payment's due. I shot him an incredulous look over my shoulder. Your car payment? Maybe you should get a job and cover your own expenses for once. Kyle sneered. Why should I work when my dad has so much money? Just give me what I need. That's enough, Alan interjected sternly, entering from the living room. I'm not just handing you piles of cash whenever you want it. You're a grown man. Act like it and get a job. In a blur of movement, Kyle swept his arm across the kitchen counter, sending plates, glasses, and silverware clattering to the floor in an explosion of shattered ceramic and glass. You ungrateful old bastard, he screamed, his face contorted into an animalistic rage. After all the hell I went through because of you. Alan stood motionless, seemingly petrified by his son's outburst. I jumped back, gasping as shards crunched under my feet. Get out, I growled through gritted teeth, mustering all my courage. Get out of our house right now, before I call the police. Kyle opened his mouth to respond, but seemed to think better of it. With one last menacing glare at us both, he spun on his heel and stormed down the hallway, slamming the front door behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. Once his footsteps faded, I crumpled into a chair, struggling to fight back terrified sobs. Alan immediately moved to comfort me, wrapping his arms tightly around my shaking shoulders. His own eyes were glazed with moisture. I'm so sorry, Marlene, he whispered hoarsely. You never should have had to go through that. You need to make him leave, I said, forcing the words out between shuddering breaths. He's out of control. He's going to seriously hurt one of us. Alan drew back, cupping my face in his calloused hands. I know, baby. After that explosion, I finally see he's too far gone. Thank God, I thought with a surge of relief. Finally, he was seeing sense. Or so I believed, until Kyle sauntered back through the front door 2 hours later, looking utterly unfazed by his meltdown. And he wasn't alone. Trailing closely behind him was a flashy woman in her late 20s with heavy eye makeup and tight, revealing clothes. Her disinterested scowl seemed permanently affixed on her face. Kyle flung his arm around her shoulders, grinning smugly at us. Since you two don't seem to like me being around so much, I'll just have Diane here move in to keep me company. The blood drained from my face as Alan and I exchanged a look of disbelieving horror. Move his skanky girlfriend. No, this couldn't be happening. Kyle? Absolutely not, Alan warned, anger seeping back into his voice. Don't you dare bring that kind of riffraff into our home. Too bad, old man. It's happening, Kyle taunted. With that, he brushed past us both, pulling Diane down the hallway to what was originally Alan's study. Oh yeah, you guys can move your little homework space to the garage, he called over his shoulder flippantly. Me and Babe need our own bedroom. I slumped back into the chair, burying my face in my hands as the sounds of raucous laughter and thumping bass erupted from down the hallway. This nightmare was only getting worse, and my husband seemed powerless to rein in his monster of a son. Living under the same roof as Kyle and his disrespectful girlfriend Diane was a waking nightmare. Nights were filled with thumping bass from their room, shouting matches, and God knows what other disturbances. Worst of all were the little glimpses I'd catch of disturbing activities whenever I passed by their door, furtive figures coming and going at all hours, hushed conversations abruptly silenced by glares in my direction. It was becoming increasingly clear that more than just his obnoxious presence was pervading our home. Kyle was running some sort of illicit operation right under our roof, putting Alan and I at legal risk. One sweltering summer night, the hallway reeked of marijuana smoke yet again. I stormed down to their door and pounded my fist against it furiously. "Kyle, keep that crap away from our part of the house. I'm not letting you turn this into some kind of trap den." The door flew open, and Kyle's sneering face appeared in the cloud of smoke. "Back off, you dried-up old hag," he spat. "What I do in my room is none of your business." My jaw clenched with rage. It becomes my business when it's happening in my home and putting me in legal jeopardy. From over Kyle's shoulder, I spotted Diane lounging on the bed in a skimpy top, lazily scrolling on her phone as if nothing were amiss. "You want a nice quiet home? Maybe you should have stayed a lonely widow then, instead of marrying into my family's problems." Kyle snarled. With a sudden shove, he sent me stumbling back. I lost my balance and crumpled hard onto the hallway floor, crying out in shock and pain as my elbow smacked against the wall. "That's it! You're out of here!" I heard Alan roar as he rushed in from the living room. "Don't you ever lay a hand on my wife again." He reached down to help me up, his face contorted in fury. For once, there were no hallowed pleas to his son, only unbridled rage. Kyle responded by spitting a huge gob of phlegm that landed squarely on Alan's cheek. The twisted smile on his face was one of pure malice. "Get out," Alan growled in a low, gravelly voice I'd never heard before. "Get out of my house before I bash your skull in and happily let the law deal with me after." Kyle cackled, seeming almost delighted at having provoked this normally mild-mannered man to the brink of violence. "Oh, I'll get out, old man. Just try and make me leave empty-handed after supporting my worthless life for—" Before he could finish, Alan's fist connected squarely with Kyle's nose in an explosion of blood and cartilage. Kyle crumpled to the floor with a high-pitched howl of agony. "That's for Marlene, you piece of garbage!" Alan spat down at his son, flexing his knuckles. The bravado disappeared from Kyle's demeanor as he cowered on the floor, cradling his gushing nose. "You'll pay for this," he blubbered through a torrent of blood and tears. "I'll make you miserable." Summoning whatever was left of my nerve, I forced myself to my feet and leveled an accusatory finger at Diane, who continued to sit casually watching the violence unfold. "Get this trash out of my house," I hissed. "Both of you, before we call the police and public services to forcibly remove you." For once the skanky woman's face betrayed a flicker of alarm, comprehending the very real prospect of legal consequences beyond this domestic dispute. In a flurry of motion, she gathered her and Kyle's belongings into ratty duffel bags as Alan and I watched stoically. With one last venomous look over his shoulder, Kyle allowed himself to be pulled out the front door, slouching away into the night, still cradling his battered face. Only when the rumble of their beat-up Honda had faded did we collapse into each other's arms, physically and emotionally spent from the turmoil. "I'm so sorry, Marlene," Alan rasped softly into my hair. "You didn't deserve any of this." Gently pulling back, I cupped his face in my hands and forced his gaze to meet mine. "No more apologies," I stated firmly. "That monster is out of our lives for good, and he's not taking anything else from us." Deep down, however, I knew it was too dangerous to rest on that conviction. The menacing fury in Kyle's eyes as he was ejected betrayed something far more unsettling than the tantrum of a spoiled brat. My stepson was unraveling into a vicious, vindictive menace willing to go to extremes in pursuit of revenge, and whatever dark dealings he'd been involved in, his pride and greed would never allow him to walk away without extracting a price. Alan and I had only begun to pay, but even we couldn't fathom how steep the cost would become. In the days after Kyle's explosive eviction, an eerie calm descended over our home. Alan and I walked on eggshells, constantly bracing for some form of retaliation that never came. "He has to be plotting something," I muttered to Alan one evening as we picked at our dinner in tense silence. "Kyle's not the type to just slink away." Alan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "You're probably right. I have no idea what he's capable of at this point." We both jumped as my phone began ringing, the shrill tone shattering the quiet. I felt my pulse quicken as I saw the caller ID. It was my brother Eric. "Hello?" "Marlene, it's me." His familiar voice crackled over the line. I think we need to talk, in person." There was an uncharacteristic solemnity to his tone that instantly put me on edge. Eric wasn't one to mince words or ask to meet up unless something serious was going on. "What's this about?" I asked, unable to mask the tremor of worry in my voice. A pause. "It's about your stepson, Kyle. I've been looking into a few things. We should discuss it face to face." My eyes flicked over to meet Alan's concerned gaze. This couldn't be good. "Okay, come over tonight after you get off work," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I spent the next few hours in a state of nervous agitation, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios about what Eric might have uncovered. Was Kyle pushing drugs, involved in organized crime of some kind? The possibilities were chilling. When Eric finally arrived that evening, his face was taut and grim. He made a beeline for the couch and dropped his voice to a hushed murmur, glancing furtively around as if he feared we were being watched. "I've been piecing some things together through my contacts and databases at the precinct," he began in a low growl. "That kid of yours, Alan, he's mixed up in some seriously dangerous stuff." Eric ran a hand over his thinning hair. "Stolen identities, credit fraud, you name it. He's got an entire black market operation going, using those scumbag friends of his to siphon money and rip people off blind." I felt the blood drain from my face as realization dawned. The shadowy figures coming and going at all hours, the scrapped plans for Alan's study to become their lair, it all made sense now. "That's why he was so desperate to keep you from kicking him out," Eric continued grimly. "He needed to operate out of your home undetected. Guys like that, they'll do anything to keep their schemes going." Alan's face was ashen. Oh God, when I think of all the times he brought strange people around, started getting belligerent out of nowhere, he was protecting his crooked schemes all along. My brother leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as his eyes bored into ours with steely intensity. "Which is why the two of you are in very real danger. Kyle clearly has no limits to what he'll do, and guys involved in this level of fraud tend to have extremely dangerous connections." The unspoken suggestion hung in the heavy silence that getting on the wrong side of Kyle's operations could mean deadly consequences. "We need to handle this extremely carefully," Eric said, his expression grave. "One misstep and you could find yourself swept up into a world you don't want any part of." My heart pounded in my ears as the gravity of the situation became clear. That vicious, greedy snake of a stepson had turned our home into a den of criminality. And now he wouldn't stop until he'd exacted vengeance upon us for daring to defy him. I felt Alan's hand finding mine, gripping tightly as we digested this nightmare in silence. Our very lives could be at stake at the hands of his own unhinged son. With a resolute nod to my brother, I knew there was only one path forward, no matter how dangerous. We had to stop Kyle's malevolence, once and for all, and we would have to match his ruthlessness every step of the way to survive. Over the next few days, Eric worked feverishly behind the scenes to gather intelligence on Kyle's operation. Calls were made, surveillance footage poured over, shady contacts leveraged for any crumbs of information. Finally, he presented us with the bombshell. Kyle's crew was about to pull off a massive identity theft and fraud scheme, their biggest score yet, and he had the date, time, and location. "This is our chance to nail that piece of garbage once and for all," Eric growled, slapping a thick manila folder on our kitchen table. "I'll organize a sting with my unit to catch him red-handed." Alan and I exchanged anxious glances. Taking down Kyle's criminal empire was the obvious necessity, but the prospect of being intimately involved in such a high-stakes police operation filled us with trepidation. "What do you need us to do?" Alan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eric fixed us with an intense stare. We're going to use Kyle's greed against him. I'll have one of my undercovers reach out saying they have some high-value financial data to sell. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. And the two of you are going to be the brokers who set up the meeting, the ones who can get him to show up in person so we can grab his slimy ass. A tense silence stretched between us as Alan and I processed what he was asking. Not only would we be dangling criminal bait in front of that viper, we'd be serving ourselves up as targets to draw his fangs. But what other choice was there? We were already marked by his venom. Leaving him to run rampant would only ensure he circled back around to strike again when we least expected it. Whatever it takes, I said firmly, squaring my shoulders as I met my brother's gaze. If being part of the sting is what's needed to finally rid our lives of that cancer once and for all, I'll do it. Alan gave a grim nod of agreement, lacing his fingers tightly through mine. 2 nights later, we found ourselves seated at a seedy bar near the industrial district, my stomach tying itself in knots as we awaited our undercover's call signaling that the trap was set. The burner phone finally rang, and I felt my heart lurch into my throat. "It's go time," Alan muttered, eyes flicking around the dingy establishment as I answered the call with trembling hands. "Yeah, I got a hot new bank data dump to move," the gruff voice at the other end stated matter-of-factly. "You still looking to buy?" "Of course," I replied, struggling to keep my tone even and businesslike despite my inner turmoil. "My partner and I can meet with the merchandise in hand tonight, ready to make a deal if it passes muster." "Perfect. Warehouse District, 10 p.m. Listen for my message on the burn phone with the exact location in 30 minutes. The call clicked off abruptly, leaving Alan and I to await further instructions with bated breath. True to their word, a new text arrived giving us a specific address, a derelict factory on the fringes of the warehouse district. Isolated, cavernous, the ideal setting for criminal dealings to unfold undetected, or so they would believe. As we pulled up outside the rusting gates, my brother's message crackled urgently through the phone's tinny speaker. "Got you covered from all angles. Just play it cool and stay frosty. Units are in position, eyes on your target coming in from the east side." My chest tightened as the unmistakable growl of Kyle's beat-up Honda echoed off the buildings, pulling in through the far gates with its high beams blazing. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as the door slammed open, his hulking form emerging into the sickly glow of the street lamps. "Well, well," he sneered as he swaggered forward, flanked by 2 of his slimy henchmen. "If it isn't Dad and the little wifey." Despite the terror coursing through me, a surge of adrenaline-fueled determination washed over me in that moment. This soulless predator had tormented our family for the last time. With a subtle nod, I signaled that the game was truly afoot. Let the vipers ensnare themselves for one final act of retribution. Kyle swaggered forward, that same twisted smirk frozen on his face, the same one that had mocked me so many times during his reign of terror under our roof. "So what's this big score you mugs are trying to peddle?" he sneered, looking us up and down with contempt. "It better be good, or else this little reunion is gonna get ugly." I felt Alan tense beside me, but kept my own expression steely. "We'll let you inspect the merchandise first, if the price is right." Producing a weathered USB drive, I placed it squarely in Kyle's outstretched palm with a subtle nod to Eric's team lying in wait. The Viper's eyes lit up with greedy intrigue, his focus fully fixated on the promise of an illicit payday. With a grunt, he handed it off to one of his henchmen, who immediately got to work on a laptop, no doubt scrutinizing the data for any whiff of fraud potential. While they were distracted, my gaze landed on the other crony loitering nearby, idly scrolling through his phone, until I noticed the unmistakable glint of a knife peeking out from his waistband. My heart stuttered with a new surge of panic. These weren't just amateur crooks. They were strapped and ready for any potential violence. One wrong move, and this entire sting could devolve into a deadly crossfire with me and Alan caught squarely in the middle. I reached out and gave Alan's hand a subtle squeeze, hoping my brother's unit was as dialed in as they promised to be. "Looks legit," the henchman finally grunted after several tense moments, slapping the laptop closed. "Ez money, as long as your crazy-ass family ain't trying to set us up." A sly smile crept across Kyle's lips as he leveled his gaze at us. Now why would we want to do that? After all the fond memories? His fingers closed tightly around the USB drive, the smirk morphing into a full sneer. Maybe we'll take this little payoff and a little extra fee from dear old Dad to make up for all the grief your bitch put me through. My jaw clenched, fury blazing inside me. Of course he couldn't let this go without one final sadistic jab. Too much to ask for a simple ending where the snake gets what's coming to him. You must be stupider than you look, I spat back, fists clenching at my sides. We're not going to just hand you money, you parasite. In a flash, both henchmen produced their weapons, leveling them squarely at us. I gasped, instinctively grabbing Alan and pushing him behind me as they fanned out in a menacing semicircle. Maybe you didn't get the memo, the knife-wielding thug snarled. We ain't asking for money. We're taking it. Drop 'em. You're surrounded. The barked command seemed to reverberate from all directions as the night exploded in a blinding haze of flashbang grenades. I blinked and coughed, struggling to see through the smoke and spot the source of the chaos. Suddenly, what seemed like dozens of black-clad figures materialized through the haze, weapons trained in a tight semicircle around Kyle and his stunned goons. This is the police! Eric's commanding voice boomed over a bullhorn. Get on the ground with your hands up! There was a tense beat of stunned silence until the knife wielder made the mistake of whipping his blade in a wild, yet unpredictable arc, met instantly with a searing volley of beanbag rounds from the officers slamming into his chest and abdomen. As he collapsed, wheezing, there was one final snap of resistance as Kyle made a panicked break for his car. But my brother was prepared, rushing out of the smoke to put him in a wrenching arm lock that sent him crashing to the pavement. Kyle Turner, you're under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, and a whole host of other fun charges. Eric growled through gritted teeth as the cuffs clicked into place. Anything you say or do will only make your life that much harder, scumbag. The still defiant scowl instantly drained from Kyle's face, replaced with naked terror as he finally grasped that the tables had turned and the ultimate consequences were closing in. As the officers hauled him roughly to his feet, his wild eyes met mine briefly, and I was flooded with the most intoxicating sensation of vindictive satisfaction. This sadistic tormentor who'd inflicted so much misery was finally, irreversibly, getting the brutal payback he deserved at the hands of righteous karma, and I was going to revel in every second of his downfall. The weeks following Kyle's dramatic arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, lurid media frenzies, and the gradual unraveling of the tangled web he'd woven. It seemed every time we thought we'd grasped the full extent of his criminal enterprises, more sordid layers would emerge. I watched it all unfold from the gallery with a strange sense of detached amusement. The smarmy swagger, the sadistic manipulation, the sheer delusion of entitlement, all of it had finally caught up to ensnare my stepson in its unforgiving karmic trap. His wretched girlfriend Diane was wrapped up in the dragnet as well, already flipped by the prosecution and ratting out every last depraved detail in a desperate bid for leniency. At this point, she was nothing more than a bug on the windshield to me, easily swatted away and forgotten amid the larger impact headed Kyle's way. Eric was relentless, leaving no insidious crevice of their activities unturned or unpunished. Fraud, money laundering, drug trafficking. Kyle's reckoning was swift and absolute. With the mountain of evidence stacked against him, it wasn't a question of if he'd be convicted, but just how many years he'd be burying himself alive behind bars. The jury has reached a verdict. Those 4 simple words from the judge's mouth sent an electric surge of anticipation through the courtroom gallery. Kyle stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable, as his team of lawyers frantically conferred one last time. The foreperson rose and cleared his throat solemnly. On the charges of mail fraud, aggravated identity theft, and drug conspiracy, we the jury find the defendant, Kyle Turner, guilty on all counts. A muted shockwave seemed to ripple through the room, punctuated only by Kyle's lawyer slumping back in her chair, utterly deflated. His lips contorted into a silent snarl, though whether out of anger or resignation, I couldn't tell. As the remainder of the lengthy verdict was read aloud, something inside me began to uncurl and unfurl. a profound lightness I hadn't experienced in what felt like an eternity. The tightness that had gripped my heart for so long steadily dissipated with every guilty issued upon my tormentor. We shuffled out through the courthouse steps into a swarm of cameras and microphones from the awaiting press, my brother taking the lead to address the media frenzy. This case sends a clear and resounding message to those who seek to corrupt and victimize our communities, he boomed in that signature authoritative rasp. We will pursue them to the fullest extent of the law and bring the full hammer of justice upon their heads. As flashbulbs exploded all around us, I sought out Alan's eyes amidst the chaos. He gave me the faintest of smiles and a subtle nod. The ghost of the same weary, downtrodden man who'd been paralyzed by his son's long trail of transgressions had finally been exorcised. He too seemed to feel the lightening of our collective burden. That night, after the cameras and crowds had dispersed, we sat in peaceful silence on the back patio. Cicadas droned their evening chorus under a canopy of stars twinkling brilliantly in the warm summer darkness. So much had changed, yet felt startlingly unchanged at the same time. The house was precisely as we'd left it that fateful morning, and yet the oppressive storm cloud that had followed us home from the courthouse finally felt completely lifted. You know, I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around how far that sick bastard was willing to go, Alan said at last, cradling his beer bottle pensively. Just to what? Punish us for not enabling him anymore? I gave a slow shake of my head. At the end of the day, it was never really about us, just his own greed and depravity swallowing him whole. I thought back to that cold, chilling glare Kyle had leveled at me in the courtroom while receiving his sentence, not one of rage or hatred, but a fathomless emptiness. For all his blustering malice, he was now just an empty husk being justly carted away. He'll spend every day of the prime of his life rotting behind bars, I stated with grim finality, and all he'll have is that void where his soul should have been to keep him company. Alan nodded, the ghost of a smirk toying at the corner of his lips as the cocoon of our nightmare finally shed away completely. So I guess that means we get to focus on filling our lives with better things now. You know, like a little peace and happiness for once. The enormity of that simple idea hung in the air, more revitalizing than the gentle breeze kicking up around us. Pulling me close, Alan pressed his lips to the top of my head, a kiss filled with a renewed sense of purpose and the untold promise of whatever lay ahead. For the first time in what felt like eternities, the horizon was wide open and full of possibilities. I'd say we've earned every last drop of it, babe, he murmured warmly against my hair, and I can't wait to start living it. I never saw it coming. One moment I was standing in my living room, confronting Trent about his suspicious behavior and unexplained absences. The next, I found myself trapped in the dark, damp confines of our basement, a place I hadn't set foot in for years. What is the meaning of this, Trent? I demanded, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and outrage. Why are you doing this? Trent's normally warm, brown eyes had turned cold and calculating. I'm doing what I have to, Avery, he said, his tone laced with a chilling finality. You were never meant to see the truth. I watched in horror as he slammed the metal door behind him, the sound echoing through the cavernous space like a death knell. Panic gripped me, my heart pounding against my chest as I frantically searched for a way out. The basement was a maze of shadows, the air thick with the musty smell of neglect. I stumbled through the darkness, my hands tracing the rough, uneven walls, desperately seeking an escape. But the more I explored, the more it became clear that Trent had trapped me in this dank, forgotten corner of our home. "Trent, please!" I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. "Let me out of here!" There was no response, only the eerie silence that seemed to taunt me, mocking my helplessness. I sank to the floor, my knees trembling as the reality of my situation sank in. How could this be happening? Trent, the man I had loved and trusted for nearly a decade, had turned against me in the most unimaginable way. Flashes of our life together played in my mind, the way he had swept me off my feet with his charming smile and his grand promises of a life filled with adventure and success. I had been so blinded by his facade, so eager to believe in the fairy tale he had spun. Now, that fairy tale had shattered, leaving me trapped in a waking nightmare. As the minutes ticked by, my mind raced, searching for a way to escape. I knew I couldn't give in to despair, not when I had so much to live for. Somewhere out there, my friends and family were wondering where I was, and I couldn't let them down. Summoning every ounce of courage I could muster, I began to explore the basement more thoroughly, searching for anything that could aid my escape. The space was cluttered with old boxes and forgotten relics, but as I sifted through the debris, a glimmer of hope emerged. Tucked away in the corner, partially obscured by a tattered tarp, was a small metal toolbox. I yanked it free, my fingers trembling as I popped it open. Inside, I found a set of old, rusted tools: a hammer, a screwdriver, and a pair of pliers. A wave of determination washed over me. I may have been trapped, but I wasn't helpless. With these tools, I could find a way out of this nightmare and reclaim my life. Gripping the screwdriver tightly, I set to work. My mind focused on the task at hand. I would not be a victim, not in my own home. Trent would pay for what he had done, and I would make sure of it. As I tinkered with the tools, a sense of purpose coursed through me, pushing back the fear that had threatened to consume me. I would find a way out of this basement, no matter what it took. The old screwdriver felt heavy in my hand, a makeshift weapon against the darkness that surrounded me. I pried open the panels of the door, searching for any weaknesses, any sign of an escape route. Time seemed to stand still as I worked, the ticking of an unseen clock the only measure of the seconds that passed. With each failed attempt, my frustration grew, but I refused to give in to despair. Then, just as I was about to give up, my fingers brushed against a small, hidden compartment in the door's frame. My heart raced as I pulled it open, revealing a set of keys, Trent's keys. "Trent, you fool," I muttered, a bitter smile spreading across my lips. "Did you really think you could keep me trapped here forever?" I wasted no time in fitting the key into the lock, turning it with a soft click. The door swung open, and I stepped out into the dimly lit hallway, my senses on high alert. The house was eerily quiet, save for the muffled sounds of Trent moving about upstairs. I crept forward, my footsteps light and cautious, until I reached the living room. That's when I saw it. A stack of papers, neatly arranged on the coffee table. They were financial statements, bank records, and legal documents, all bearing Trent's name. As I sifted through them, a sinking feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. "Oh, Trent," I whispered, "what have you done?" The papers revealed a web of financial fraud, hidden offshore accounts, and shady business deals. It was all there, the damning evidence of Trent's betrayal, his carefully constructed facade crumbling before my eyes. I quickly gathered the documents, stuffing them into a messenger bag I found nearby. With this evidence, I would be able to expose Trent's crimes and bring him to justice. Just then, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps on the stairs. My heart raced as I ducked behind the couch, holding my breath and praying that Trent wouldn't find me. "Avery?" Trent's voice called out, the hint of panic in his tone betraying his composure. "Avery, where are you?" I watched as he strode into the living room, his eyes darting around the space. He approached the coffee table, his brow furrowing as he noticed the missing documents. No, he muttered, his hands trembling. "This can't be happening." I seized the moment, stepping out from my hiding place and confronting him head-on. "Looking for these, Trent?" I said, holding up the incriminating papers. Trent's face paled, the color draining from his features. "Avery, how did I escape?" I interrupted, my voice laced with disdain. "It seems you underestimated me, dear husband. Now, it's time to face the consequences of your actions." Trent's expression morphed from shock to panic as he realized the gravity of his predicament. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, silencing him. "Save it, Trent. I've seen everything, and I'm not going to let you get away with this." With that, I turned and headed for the door, determined to seek the help of the authorities and ensure that Trent's reign of deception and fraud came to an end. With the incriminating documents in hand, I knew I had to get out of the house as quickly as possible. Trent's panicked expression had told me all I needed to know. He would stop at nothing to keep his secrets hidden. I hurried toward the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. But just as I reached for the handle, I heard Trent's voice behind me, dripping with a chilling mixture of desperation and rage. "Avery, stop! You can't leave. You have no idea what you're dealing with." I turned to face him, holding the bag of documents close to my body. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, Trent. You're a fraud, a criminal, and I'm going to make sure the world knows it. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the man I had once loved, the charming, charismatic figure who had swept me off my feet. But that man was gone, replaced by a twisted, desperate individual willing to do anything to preserve his carefully constructed facade. "Please, Avery, you have to understand," he pleaded, taking a step closer. "If you leave, you'll be putting yourself in grave danger. I'm only trying to protect you." I scoffed, unwilling to be swayed by his empty words. "Protect me? You locked me in the basement, Trent. You betrayed my trust and everything we built together. I won't let you manipulate me anymore." I turned the doorknob, but before I could pull the door open, Trent lunged forward, his hands grasping at the bag. We struggled, each of us refusing to let go, until a sudden movement from the corner of my eye caught my attention. "Lena!" I cried, recognizing my neighbor standing just outside the open door. Lena's eyes widened as she took in the scene unfolding before her. Without hesitation, she rushed forward, her hands pushing Trent away from me. "Get away from her, you monster!" Lena shouted, her voice laced with fury. Trent stumbled back, a look of pure panic on his face. "Lena, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Lena interrupted, stepping in front of me protectively. "I've seen the way you've been behaving, Trent, and I won't let you hurt Avery anymore." Trent's gaze darted between Lena and me, his desperation palpable. "You have to believe me. I'm trying to keep her safe. If she leaves, she'll be in grave danger." Lena scoffed, her expression unwavering. "We both know that's a lie. Now, get out of our way, or I'll make sure the police hear everything." Trent's shoulders slumped in defeat, and without another word he stepped aside, allowing Lena and me to pass. As we hurried out the door, I couldn't help but glance back at him, a tinge of sorrow mixed with the overwhelming sense of relief. Once we were safely outside, Lena turned to me, her eyes filled with concern. "Avery, are you all right? What's going on?" I took a deep breath, my hands still trembling from the ordeal. "Lena, I need your help. Trent is not who he seems. He's been involved in criminal activities, and I have the evidence to prove it." Lena's expression hardened, and she nodded resolutely. "Then we need to get this to the authorities, immediately. You're not alone in this, Avery. I'm with you, every step of the way." As we rushed toward Lena's car, I knew that with her by my side, I finally had a chance to bring Trent's deception to an end. The road ahead would be difficult, but I was more determined than ever to reclaim my life and see that justice was served. As Lena and I sped away from the house, a sense of relief and determination washed over me. I had escaped Trent's clutches, and now, with the incriminating documents in hand, I had a chance to expose his crimes and reclaim my life. "Where are we going?" I asked, gripping the bag tightly. "To my place," Lena replied, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "We need to gather some people we can trust and figure out our next move." I nodded, knowing that I couldn't take on Trent alone. This was a battle that required a unified front, and I was grateful to have Lena by my side. When we arrived at Lena's cozy townhouse, she ushered me inside, her expression serious. "Avery, I know this is a lot to process, but we need to act quickly. Trent is dangerous, and he's not going to give up without a fight." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I know, Lena. That's why I need your help. I can't do this alone." Lena placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone. I've already reached out to a couple of people who can help us." Just then, the doorbell rang, and Lena hurried to answer it. I watched as she ushered in a familiar face, Marcus, my childhood friend. "Avery," Marcus exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug. "Lena told me what happened. Are you all right?" "I'm okay, Marcus," I replied, squeezing his hand gratefully. "But Trent? He's not who I thought he was." Marcus's expression darkened. "I always knew there was something off about that guy. What did he do?" I quickly explained the situation, outlining Trent's web of deceit and the damning evidence I had uncovered. Marcus's face tightened with a mix of shock and anger. "That son of a bitch," he growled. "Don't worry, Avery. We're going to make sure he pays for what he's done." Just then, the doorbell rang again, and Lena ushered in another guest, Eliza, a lawyer friend of hers. "Avery, I'm so sorry to hear about what you've been through," Eliza said, her voice laced with concern. "Lena told me everything, and I'm here to help in any way I can." I felt a surge of gratitude, knowing that I had the support of these powerful allies. Together, we would take down Trent and ensure that he faced the consequences of his actions. "Thank you all for being here," I said, my voice steady. "I know Trent is a formidable opponent, but with your help, I'm confident we can expose his crimes and bring him to justice." The group gathered around Lena's dining room table, poring over the documents I had retrieved. Eliza took charge, her legal expertise guiding our discussion. "This evidence is damning, Avery," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We can use it to build a strong case against Trent, but we'll need to be strategic in how we approach this." Marcus chimed in, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Whatever it takes, we'll do it. Trent's not going to get away with this, not on our watch." As I listened to my friend's unwavering support, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was no longer alone in this fight. Together, we would bring Trent down and reclaim the life he had stolen from me. Seated around Lena's dining room table, the group pored over the documents I had obtained, each of us determined to uncover the full extent of Trent's deceit. Eliza, the savvy lawyer, took the lead, her sharp eyes scanning the financial records and legal paperwork. "This is worse than I thought," she murmured, her brow furrowing in concentration. "Trent has been involved in a complex web of fraud, money laundering, and other illicit activities. We'll need to tread carefully if we're going to bring him down." Marcus, my loyal childhood friend, clenched his fist, his knuckles turning white. "That bastard," he growled. "After everything he's put Avery through, he deserves to rot in prison." Lena placed a calming hand on Marcus's arm. "Easy, Marcus. We can't afford to be reckless. Trent is dangerous, and we need to make sure we have an airtight case against him." I nodded, my own anger simmering just beneath the surface. Lena's right. We need to be strategic, and that means gathering as much evidence as possible. Trent won't go down without a fight. Eliza cleared her throat, drawing our attention. "Well, I have an idea. It's risky, but if we pull it off, we might be able to catch Trent red-handed and expose his crimes to the world." We leaned in, hanging on her every word as she laid out her plan. It was a bold, daring scheme that would require all of our resources and unwavering determination. But as Eliza spoke, I felt a surge of hope. This was our chance to take back control and make Trent pay for his betrayal. "Are you all in?" Eliza asked, her gaze sweeping across the table. Without hesitation, we all nodded, our resolve steeled by the prospect of justice. In the days that followed, we set our plan in motion, each of us playing a crucial role. Lena and Marcus used their connections to gather additional information about Trent's activities, while Eliza worked tirelessly to ensure our legal strategy was airtight. Meanwhile, I found myself delving into the world of digital espionage, hacking into Trent's accounts and monitoring his movements. It was a risky endeavor, but the thought of Trent's reckoning fueled my determination. As we inched closer to our goal, the tension in the air was palpable. Trent seemed oblivious to our machinations, continuing to go about his day-to-day life with his usual air of confidence and charm. "He has no idea what's coming," Eliza said, a triumphant gleam in her eye. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for the man I had once loved. But that sentiment was quickly overshadowed by the thirst for justice. "Let's make sure he pays for what he's done," I said, my voice resolute. With the final pieces of our plan in place, we set the stage for Trent's downfall. The day of the big event arrived, and as I stood alongside my allies, I felt a sense of power and determination that I had never experienced before. When Trent arrived, his usual swagger replaced by a hint of unease, I knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. It was time to confront him, to expose his crimes, and to ensure that he faced the consequences of his actions. As I stepped forward, the incriminating documents in hand, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation that was about to unfold. As Trent approached, his gaze darting around the crowded event space, I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was the moment we had been waiting for, the chance to bring him down and expose his deceit once and for all. I stepped forward, the incriminating documents clutched in my hand. "Trent," I called out, my voice ringing out across the room. "We need to talk." Trent's eyes widened as he recognized me, and a flicker of panic crossed his features. He tried to maintain his composure, but I could see the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. "Avery," he said, his tone laced with a forced calmness, "what are you doing here?" "I'm here to expose your crimes, Trent," I replied, my words dripping with venom. "Your web of fraud and deception ends today." A hush fell over the crowd as they sensed the tension in the air. Trent's gaze darted around the room, his eyes pleading for someone to intervene, but no one moved. "I don't know what you're talking about, Avery," he said, his voice wavering. "This is all just a misunderstanding." I stepped closer, holding the documents up for all to see. "Oh, it's no misunderstanding, Trent. These documents prove that you've been embezzling funds, manipulating financial records, and even laundering money. Your entire empire is built on a foundation of lies." Trent's face paled, and I could see the beads of sweat forming on his brow. "Avery, please, you have to understand. I was only trying to protect you. Everything I've done for us." I scoffed, the disgust evident in my expression. "Protect me? You locked me in a basement, Trent. You betrayed my trust and everything we had. And now you're trying to cover up your crimes by playing the victim?" The crowd erupted in murmurs, and I could see the realization dawning on their faces. Trent's carefully crafted image was crumbling before our eyes. "This is all a lie," Trent shouted, his desperation palpable. "Avery is the one who's been unfaithful, not me. She's the one who's been stealing from me." I shook my head, unwilling to let him deflect the blame. "Nice try, Trent, but your lies won't work this time. The authorities have already been informed, and they're on their way to arrest you." Trent's eyes widened in horror, and he took a step back, his gaze darting around the room in search of an escape. But there was nowhere for him to run. Not this time. "No, this can't be happening," he cried, his voice laced with a mix of fear and fury. "Avery, you have to believe me. I'm the victim here." I watched as the realization dawned on him, the walls closing in as his carefully constructed world crumbled around him. There was no more room for his deceptions, no more chances to escape the consequences of his actions. "It's over, Trent," I said, my voice firm and unyielding. "Your reign of terror is at an end." Just then, the sound of sirens echoed through the air, signaling the arrival of the authorities. Trent's face contorted with a desperate panic, and he made one final, futile attempt to flee. But it was too late. The police officers swiftly apprehended him, their faces grim as they read him his rights. I stood there, my heart racing as I watched Trent being led away, his desperate pleas fading into the distance. The confrontation had been intense, but it was over. Trent's downfall had been set in motion, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. As I watched the police officers lead Trent away, a wave of emotions washed over me. Relief, yes, but also a lingering sense of disbelief and sorrow. Despite everything he had done, a part of me still couldn't reconcile the man I had married with the criminal he had become. The crowd around me erupted in a flurry of activity, people whispering and murmuring, their expressions a mix of shock and awe. I stood there, clutching the incriminating documents, feeling a strange sense of both triumph and emptiness. Lena, Marcus, and Eliza quickly gathered around me, their faces etched with concern. "Avery, are you okay?" Lena asked, placing a gentle hand on my arm. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought it would end like this." Marcus squeezed my shoulder, his expression hardening. "He got what he deserved, Avery. That bastard's gonna pay for what he's done to you." Eliza nodded in agreement, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. "We'll make sure he faces the full consequences of his actions. The evidence we gathered is solid, and the authorities are already building their case against him." I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "Then let's make sure justice is served. I want Trent to lose everything. His business, his reputation, everything he's worked so hard to build." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Trent's arrest made headlines, and as the details of his crimes began to unfold, the public's outrage only intensified. Suddenly, those he had once manipulated and charmed turned against him, eager to see him brought to justice. His business empire crumbled as clients and partners severed ties, unwilling to be associated with his tarnished name. Investors pulled out, and the once thriving company found itself on the brink of collapse. Trent, once the picture of success and affluence, was reduced to a tattered shadow of his former self. I watched from the sidelines as he desperately tried to defend himself, but his lies and excuses only served to dig him deeper into a hole of his own making. At one point during a heated court hearing, Trent turned to me, his eyes wild and pleading. "Avery, you have to help me," he begged, his voice trembling. "I can't go to prison. You have to make them see reason." I stared at him, my expression unwavering. "You had your chance, Trent. You chose to betray me, to betray everything we had. Now you have to face the consequences of your actions." Trent's face contorted with a mix of rage and despair. "You're going to ruin me," he shouted, his outburst drawing the attention of the court. The judge, unimpressed by Trent's outburst, shook his head in disgust. "Mr. Clark, your actions have already ruined you. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and I have no choice but to remand you into custody until your trial." Trent's shoulders slumped in defeat, and as the bailiffs escorted him away, I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity. Despite everything he had done, a part of me still mourned the man I had once loved, the one who had so skillfully hidden his true nature behind a facade of charm and success. But that man was gone, replaced by a desperate, broken individual who was now facing the full weight of his crimes. As I watched him disappear, I knew that this was the end of an era, the end of Trent's reign of deception, and the beginning of a new chapter in my life. As the dust settled around Trent's dramatic downfall, I found myself standing at a crossroads in my life. The man I had once loved and trusted was now facing the consequences of his actions, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my own shattered existence. In the weeks that followed, I dove headfirst into rebuilding my career and reclaiming my independence. With the support of Lena, Marcus, and Eliza, I was able to secure a new job as a marketing consultant, using my skills and experience to forge a fresh start. "You know, Avery, I'm really proud of you," Lena said one evening as we sipped our wine at her cozy townhouse. "After everything you've been through, you're picking yourself up and moving forward." I smiled, feeling a sense of pride and relief wash over me. It hasn't been easy, but I'm determined to make the most of this new chapter. Trent may have taken so much from me, but he can't take away my strength and resilience. Lena reached across the table, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. "And you have us, Avery. We're here for you, no matter what." I nodded, knowing that I was truly blessed to have such loyal and unwavering friends by my side. "I don't know what I'd do without you all. You've been my lifeline through this whole ordeal." Marcus, who had joined us for the evening, leaned back in his chair, a mischievous grin on his face. "Well, what are friends for? We're just glad we could help take that son of a bitch down. He's getting what he deserves. And you, Avery, you're the one who came out on top." I couldn't help but chuckle at Marcus's blunt assessment. That may be true, but it hasn't exactly been easy. Trent was a big part of my life for so long, and letting go of that has been challenging, to say the least. Eliza, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "I can only imagine how difficult this must be for you, Avery, but you've shown incredible strength and resilience. You're not defined by Trent's actions. You're so much more than that." I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for my friends and their unwavering support. "You're right, Eliza. I'm ready to move on and focus on the future. Trent may have taken away my security and sense of trust, but he can't take away my drive and determination to rebuild my life." As the evening wore on, we shared laughter, exchanged stories, and made plans for the future. I found myself feeling lighter, more hopeful than I had in months. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work, pouring my energy into developing innovative marketing strategies for my clients. The more I immersed myself in my career, the more I felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment returning to my life. And as I navigated this new chapter, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led me here. Trent's betrayal had been a devastating blow, but with the unwavering support of my friends and my own indomitable spirit, I had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. I may have lost my fairy tale, but in its place I had gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that I was capable of overcoming even the darkest of obstacles. And as I looked towards the future, I felt a renewed sense of excitement and possibility, ready to embrace all that lay ahead. "Brad, why can't we just be together openly?" I muttered under my breath as I heard those words from my husband's office. My heart pounded in my chest as I froze outside his door, eavesdropping on the heated conversation between him and Tara, our young business partner. "Trust me, Tara. We need to keep this quiet a little longer," Brad's voice responded, laced with a tenderness I hadn't heard from him in years. A sick feeling washed over me as the realization dawned. My husband of 20 years was having an affair with our employee, right under my nose. Memories flashed through my mind, taking me back to the early days when Brad and I had started our tech company from scratch. We were young, ambitious, and blissfully in love, working tirelessly alongside our small team to make our dream a reality. Tara had joined us fresh out of college, her youthful energy and innovative ideas quickly making her an invaluable asset. Funny how things can change so drastically without you even realizing it. As the business grew, so did Tara's influence over Brad. I noticed her overly friendly demeanor, the way she would linger a little too long during their conversations, and how Brad seemed increasingly enamored with her ideas. At first, I brushed it off as professional camaraderie, but the nagging feeling in my gut only intensified with each passing day. Then came the late nights at the office, the unexplained absences, and the sudden influx of suspicious charges on Brad's credit card statements. I tried to confront him, but he always had an excuse ready, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. One fateful evening, I decided to follow my instincts. I tailed Brad and Tara to a luxurious hotel downtown, my heart shattering as I witnessed them entering hand in hand, laughing and completely oblivious to my presence. "Funny seeing you two here." "Planning a business meeting?" I called out, my voice dripping with sarcasm as I stepped into the lobby. Brad's face drained of color, his excuses tumbling out in a jumbled mess. But Tara, that conniving little vixen, simply smirked and said, "Oh, Jenna, don't be so naive. Brad and I are in love, and there's nothing you can do about it." In that moment, something inside me snapped. The years of loyalty, sacrifice, and emotional investment I had poured into our marriage and business came crashing down around me. I would not be the one left broken and humiliated. Not this time. The next morning, I marched into the best divorce attorney's office, determined to fight for every penny of the empire Brad and I had built together. If he thought he could simply discard me for his younger mistress, he had another thing coming. As the dust settled from my initial confrontation with Brad and Tara, I found myself retreating into memories of happier times, back when our dream was just taking shape. Those early days were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, fueled by passion and an unwavering belief in our vision. Brad and I had met fresh out of college, both brilliant minds with a knack for coding and an insatiable drive to create something revolutionary. We scraped together every penny we had and rented a dingy little office space, assembling a ragtag team of fellow tech enthusiasts who shared our ambitious goals. Mark, our trusty developer, was the first to join us, bringing his unparalleled coding skills and a wicked sense of humor that kept our spirits high during the toughest moments. Then came Linda, a fierce legal eagle whose sharp wit and strategic thinking became invaluable assets as we navigated the treacherous waters of startup life. Those early years were a constant uphill battle, with more setbacks than successes. But through it all, Brad and I remained a united front, our love for each other and our dream fueling our persistence. We worked tirelessly, often pulling all-nighters to meet deadlines and secure funding. "You two are crazy. You know that?" Linda would tease, shaking her head as she found us hunched over our laptops at 3 a.m., sustaining ourselves on stale donuts and lukewarm coffee. "Crazy's the only way to make it in this business," Brad would retort with a mischievous grin, his eyes sparkling with determination. And make it we did. Against all odds, our little startup began to gain traction, attracting the attention of major investors and industry heavyweights. With each success, our team grew stronger, our bond forged through countless battles and shared triumphs. That's when Tara joined us, fresh-faced and brimming with ambition. At first, I welcomed her enthusiasm, never suspecting the serpent that lurked beneath her innocent facade. Little did I know that her arrival would mark the beginning of the end for the life I had so carefully crafted. "Jenna, darling, you really should let me handle the investor meetings from now on." She would purr, her words dripping with false concern. You've been working so hard lately. You deserve a break." Foolishly, I brushed off her comments, blinded by the success we were enjoying and the unwavering trust I had in Brad. But with each passing day, Tara's influence over him grew stronger, her venomous words slowly poisoning his mind against me. As I delved deeper into the betrayal, the memories of our early struggles took on a bittersweet tinge. The very foundations upon which we had built our empire were now crumbling beneath the weight of lies and deceit. But even as the sting of Brad's infidelity threatened to consume me, a newfound determination took root. If they thought they could simply discard me like yesterday's garbage, they had severely underestimated the fury of a woman scorned. I would fight for what was rightfully mine, and they would rue the day they ever crossed me. As the months dragged on, Tara's infiltration into our once tight-knit circle became increasingly pronounced. Her sickly sweet demeanor would quickly sour the moment Brad left the room, replaced by a calculating coldness that sent shivers down my spine. "You're looking a bit worn out today, Jenna," she would simper, her ruby-red lips curled into a patronizing smile. "Maybe you should take the afternoon off. Let the rest of us handle things." I would bite my tongue, forcing a tight-lipped smile as I watched her slink over to Brad's side, draping herself over him like a cheap suit. The way he would beam at her suggestive comments, oblivious to the venom she spewed the moment his back was turned, made my stomach churn. Worst of all were the investor meetings, where Tara would shamelessly flaunt her youth and charm, soaking up the attention like a preening peacock. I could see the hungry looks in the eyes of our potential business partners, their gazes lingering just a little too long on her exposed curves. "Fellas, eyes up here," she would purr, reveling in the spectacle she created. "Unless you'd like Jenna and me to give you a private demonstration later?" The grating laughter that followed those crude remarks was like nails on a chalkboard, but Brad seemed utterly entranced, hanging on her every word. "Tara's just being Tara," he would chuckle, brushing off my concerns with a wave of his hand. "You know how she loves to play up the sex kitten act for these old geezers." But I knew better. With each passing day, Tara's grip on Brad tightened, her insidious whispers slowly turning him against me and everyone else who had stood by us from the beginning. "You know, Mark's coat has been looking pretty sloppy lately," she would murmur, her voice dripping with false concern. "Maybe it's time we brought in some fresh talent, get this project back on track." Before I knew it, longtime colleagues who had bled alongside us were being pushed out, replaced by Tara's hand-picked cronies. Her twisted tentacles were slowly tightening around our company, squeezing the life out of everything we had built. Yet, no matter how many warnings I issued, Brad seemed blissfully oblivious to her machinations, too besotted by her youthful charms to see the serpent lurking beneath. The final straw came when I overheard a heated argument between them, their voices carrying from the confines of Brad's office. "We can't keep funneling money into that offshore account, Tara," Brad hissed, his usual bravado replaced by a quivering uncertainty. "Jenna's getting suspicious, and the auditors are breathing down my neck." "Don't be such a coward, Bradley," Tara snapped, her honeyed tones replaced by a biting venom. "We're so close to having everything we've ever wanted. A little thing like your wife isn't going to stop us now." As the weight of her words crashed over me, a cold clarity washed away the final vestiges of denial. This went far beyond a mere affair. Tara's claws were dug deep into the financial lifeblood of our company, and she was bleeding us dry. In that moment, I knew there was only one path forward: to fight with every ounce of my being, to excise this malignant tumor before it destroyed everything we had worked so hard to build. The gloves were finally off, and I would show no mercy. After weeks of mounting suspicion and piecing together the twisted web of lies, I decided it was time to catch Brad and Tara red-handed. I hired a private investigator to track their movements, and sure enough, the sleazy truth was unveiled. They had been carrying on their sordid affair at a luxurious hotel downtown, using company funds to finance their trysts. The thought of them squandering the money we had poured our blood, sweat, and tears into made my blood boil. One evening, as the investigator's report placed them at the hotel, I took matters into my own hands. Gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled fury, I tailed them from a distance, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and grim determination. As I pulled up to the opulent entrance, I spotted their car parked brazenly in the valet area. Taking a deep breath, I strode through the revolving doors, my heels clicking against the marble floors like a death knell. There they were, ensconced in a plush sofa in the lobby bar, Brad's arm draped possessively around Tara's waist as she giggled and batted her lashes at him. The sight of their twisted intimacy made my stomach churn. "Funny seeing you two here," I announced, my voice ringing out like a gunshot in the hushed ambience. "Planning a business meeting, I assume?" Brad's head whipped around, his face draining of color as he registered my presence. "Jenna, what are you doing here?" Tara, however, simply rolled her eyes and took a languid sip of her cocktail. "Oh, please. Spare us the theatrics, Jenna. We both know you've been aware of our little arrangement for quite some time now." Her brazen admission hit me like a sucker punch to the gut. All the months of suspicion and gut-wrenching doubt came crashing down in that moment, leaving me reeling. You vile little snake," I spat, my carefully cultivated composure crumbling. "How could you, Brad? After everything we've been through together?" Brad's mouth opened and closed like a gasping fish, his excuses dying on his lips as Tara calmly stroked his arm in a sickeningly possessive gesture. "Don't be so dramatic, Jenna," she purred, her voice dripping with contempt. "Bradley and I are simply pursuing our happiness together, something you've clearly failed to provide him with." Her words lanced through me like white-hot daggers, laying bare the insecurities and inadequacies I had grappled with for months. But even as the emotional floodgates threatened to burst open, something hardened within me, a steely resolve forged in the fires of my rage. "You want dramatic?" I snarled, leaning in until I was nose to nose with the smirking viper. "I'll show you dramatic, you backstabbing little tramp." Straightening up, I turned to Brad, who visibly shrank under my withering glare. "Don't even think about coming home tonight. In fact, don't bother coming home at all. I'm filing for divorce first thing in the morning, and I'm taking you for every last penny you're worth." Spinning on my heel, I stormed out of the lobby, my head held high despite the maelstrom of emotions raging within. The battle lines had been drawn, and there would be no quarter given. They wanted war? They had just declared it on the wrong woman. True to my word, the next morning I marched into the office of the most cutthroat divorce attorney in town and laid everything on the table. The anger and humiliation still burned hot within me as I recounted the sordid tale of Brad's betrayal and Tara's underhanded machinations. "I want everything," I growled, slamming my fist on the desk for emphasis. "The house, the cars, a majority stake in the company, and I want that little snake Tara out on her ass." The shark-like grin that spread across the lawyer's face told me I had come to the right place. "Consider it done, Mrs. Thompson. We're going to bleed your soon-to-be ex-husband dry." With those words, the legal firestorm was unleashed. I hit Brad with divorce papers faster than he could say irreconcilable differences, leaving him and his little mistress reeling. Of course, the two degenerates didn't go down without a fight. Brad sauntered into the office the next day, Tara clinging to his arm like a remora to a shark, both wearing matching sneers of arrogant disdain. "You really think you can take this company away from me, Jenna?" Brad scoffed, puffing out his chest. "I built this empire from the ground up. You were just along for the ride." "That's right," Tara chimed in, her shrill voice like nails on a chalkboard. "And now that Brad and I are together, we're going to take this business to even greater heights. You won't get a penny more than the courts decide." I wanted nothing more than to slap that smug look off her face, but I held my tongue. They could posture and bluster all they wanted. I knew I had them by the proverbial short and curlies. Thanks to the detailed records I had meticulously kept over the years, documenting Brad's shady dealings and Tara's financial chicanery, I had a legal sledgehammer poised to crush their delusions of grandeur. "You want to play hardball?" I asked, leaning back in my chair with a wolfish grin. "Fine by me. I've got enough evidence of your little slush fund scam to bury you both in civil and criminal charges." The blood drained from Brad's face as his bravado rapidly deflated. Tara, on the other hand, simply glared at me with undisguised hatred, her scarlet talons digging into Brad's arm. From that point on, it was open warfare. Our once thriving startup descended into a bitter battle zone, with each side lobbing legal salvos and vicious accusations. Loyal soldiers quickly rallied to my side, disgusted by Brad and Tara's flagrant betrayal. Mark, bless his brilliant but socially inept heart, became my unofficial tech wizard, quietly gathering evidence of Brad's financial misdeeds. Linda, with her razor-sharp legal mind, tore apart their flimsy fence piece by piece in deposition after deposition. Meanwhile, our board of investors grew increasingly uneasy with the turmoil, watching in horror as the shining jewel of our company became tarnished by the endless cycle of scandals. Still, through it all, Brad and Tara maintained their aura of delusional confidence, secure in their belief that his stranglehold on the business would carry the day. Little did they know, their downfall was merely a matter of time, and I would be the one delivering the killing blow. The day of reckoning finally arrived, and the air in the courthouse crackled with tension as Brad, Tara, and I squared off before the stern-faced judge. Despite their bravado, I could see the first flickers of doubt in their eyes as the weight of the evidence against them became impossible to ignore. "You won't get a penny more than the courts decide, Jenna," Brad hissed under his breath, his lips curled in a sneer. "I control this company. It's mine." Before I could respond, the bailiff called the courtroom to order, and the proceedings began in earnest. I watched with grim satisfaction as my legal team methodically dismantled Brad and Tara's defense, presenting a mountain of damning evidence that left them squirming in their seats. Financial records detailing their embezzlement schemes, caught on tape conspiring to funnel company funds into offshore accounts, even secretly recorded audio of Tara coercing Brad to cut me out of the business entirely. It was all laid bare for the world to see. With each bombshell revelation, Tara's smug veneer cracked a little more, her perfectly coiffed mask slipping to reveal the vicious snake lurking beneath. Brad, for his part, simply sat in stunned silence, the reality of his impending downfall slowly sinking in. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the judge banged her gavel, calling for order in the courtroom. "In light of the overwhelming evidence presented," she began, her steely gaze sweeping over the trio of co-conspirators, "I am ruling in favor of Mrs. Thompson on all counts." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, but I simply sat back and allowed a small, victorious smile to spread across my face. The old bat wasn't done yet. "Mr. Thompson and Ms. Roberts, your actions have not only violated the sanctity of your marriage vows, but have also shown a blatant disregard for corporate ethics and the law itself," the judge continued, her voice laced with disgust. "As such, I am awarding Mrs. Thompson a controlling stake in the company, effective immediately, as well as the entirety of the marital assets." Tara let out a strangled shriek of outrage, her perfectly manicured claws digging into the wooden bench as she fought to maintain her composure. Brad, on the other hand, simply slumped forward, his head cradled in his hands as the weight of his defeat crushed him. But the judge wasn't finished. Leaning forward, she fixed them with a piercing glare that could have melted steel. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for a full investigation into potential criminal charges related to fraud, embezzlement, and corporate malfeasance. You two have made a mockery of the legal system and the values this company was built upon, and you will face the full consequences of your actions." As the bailiffs led the disgraced pair away in handcuffs, Tara still screeching obscenities through her smeared makeup, I couldn't help but savor the sweetness of victory. They had underestimated me at every turn, secure in their belief that they could simply trample all over me and walk away unscathed. Well, they were about to learn just how wrong they were, and I would delight in grinding their precious empire into the dust beneath my designer heels. With the legal battle decisively won, and Brad and Tara's misdeeds laid bare, I wasted no time in asserting my new control over the company. My first order of business? Clearing out the rot that had infested the ranks thanks to their toxic influence. One by one, I handpicked Tara's gaggle of sycophants and tossed them out on their oversculpted behinds, reveling in the looks of abject horror on their stunned faces as security escorted them from the premises. But Miss Roberts assured us we would be taken care of." One particularly vapid little thing sputtered, her fake lashes fluttering in panic. I simply shrugged. utterly unmoved. Well, Miss Roberts isn't calling the shots anymore. I'd suggest finding a new sugar mama to leech off of. With the dead weight jettisoned, I set about rebuilding our once proud company from the ground up, surrounding myself with trusted allies like Mark and Linda. They had stuck by me through the darkest days of the legal firestorm, and their loyalty would be rewarded tenfold. Of course, Brad and his slithering paramour didn't go quietly into the night. Even from behind bars, they launched a vicious media smear campaign, painting me as a heartless, vindictive shrew determined to destroy everything they had built. Jenna Thompson is a bitter, jealous woman lashing out at her ex-husband out of sheer spite, Tara whined to anyone who would listen, her voice trembling with faux indignation. She's taking her revenge too far and jeopardizing the livelihoods of hundreds of innocent employees. I simply smiled and shook my head at their pathetic attempts to sway public opinion. The evidence of their misdeeds was too overwhelming, the stench of their corruption too overpowering to be washed away with a few crocodile tears. As the weeks ticked by, their once formidable empire began to crumble around them, a self-inflicted wound caused by years of shady dealings and gross mismanagement. Business partners jumped ship in droves, repulsed by the stain of scandal. Investors clamored for their money back, unwilling to be dragged down with the sinking ship. All the while, I watched from the sidelines with a mixture of vindication and pity. These were the same two arrogant fools who had smugly assured me that they controlled everything, that I was simply a footnote in their grand narrative. Yet with each passing day, their grandiose delusions withered further, until they were left with nothing but the ashes of their shattered legacy. And I, the woman they had so callously discarded, was there to sweep up the remains and rebuild an empire worthy of the sacrifices that had been made. The final insult came when their former colleagues, desperate to salvage what was left of the business, came groveling to me with an offer to buy out the remaining assets at a fraction of their worth. I could have dragged out the negotiations, bled them dry as payback for the anguish they had put me through. Instead, I simply smiled, slid the contract across the table, and said, "Just get it over with, boys. I have a new empire to build." As they scurried away with their tails between their legs, I leaned back in my chair and allowed the vindication to wash over me. The ultimate revenge? Reducing Brad and Tara's grandiose dreams to a mere footnote in the legacy I was crafting for myself. In the months that followed, the tables well and truly turned on Brad and Tara. As I thrived in my new role at the helm of my own blossoming entrepreneurial ventures, they found themselves drowning in a cesspool of their own making. The money, the status, the glamorous lifestyle they had so desperately coveted, it all slipped through their greedy fingers like fistfuls of sand. With each passing day, news of their downward spiral made the headlines, a sordid tale of hubris and karma come full circle. Former tech mogul Bradley Thompson faces additional fraud charges, the headlines would scream, detailing the latest revelations of financial malfeasance. Tara, for her part, fared no better. Her youthful looks, once her greatest asset in ensnaring hapless men like my former husband, withered under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. No amount of overpriced cosmetic procedures could hide the haggard, haunted look in her eyes as the walls closed in around her. Disgraced socialite Tara Roberts spotted in seedy motel, the tabloids would crow, plastering unflattering photos of the fallen temptress across their sleazy pages. I'll admit, there was a perverse sense of satisfaction in watching their downward spiral play out in such spectacular fashion. These were the same two vipers who had once looked down their noses at me, secure in their belief that they held all the cards. Now the roles were reversed, and I was the one calling the shots. An inescapable truth that seemed to torment them more than any prison sentence or financial ruin ever could. "You haven't seen the last of me, Jenna," Tara snarled during one of her increasingly unhinged television interviews. "Mark my words, I'll be back on top before you know it, and you'll be the one groveling at my feet." I simply chuckled at her empty bravado, secure in the knowledge that her words carried all the weight of a deflating balloon. She was a spent force, a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition and greed consume one's moral compass. As for Brad, well, his fate was perhaps the most tragic of all. Once a proud, ambitious man with the world at his feet, He had been reduced to a hollow shell of his former self, his spirit broken by the weight of his own misdeeds. During his highly publicized trial, I watched from the gallery as he shuffled into the courtroom, his shoulders slumped, his eyes downcast. Gone was the cocksure swagger, the easy charm that had once made him so magnetic. In its place was a haunted, defeated man, the consequences of his actions finally coming into stark relief. In the end, both he and Tara were handed lengthy prison sentences, along with crushing financial penalties that would ensure they could never again regain a foothold in the business world. As the judge read out their fate, I caught Brad's gaze, his hollow eyes silently pleading for, what? Understanding? Forgiveness? I simply held his stare, my expression impassive, until he finally dropped his head in resignation. There would be no absolution, no second chances. He had made his bed, and now he would lie in it, forever branded as the man who threw away everything for a pretty face and a few fleeting moments of pleasure. As I stepped out into the brilliant sunshine, leaving the sordid spectacle behind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. The long, arduous road I had traveled, fraught with heartbreak and betrayal, had finally reached its end. A new chapter was beginning, one forged from the ashes of the life I had once known. And as I looked to the future, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the strength and resilience that had carried me through my darkest hours. I've found the strength to reclaim my life and destiny, I murmured, more to myself than anyone else, and no one will ever take that away from me again.